The lawyer's hand froze over the mouse when he saw her name on the screen. The woman who'd never noticed him in high school, now walking into his office 20 years later, asking him to save her life. But this wasn't about old crushes or second chances. This was about power, betrayal, and a CEO whose perfect marriage was actually a cage. Her husband had the money, the connections, and a plan to destroy her. She had one advantage. The invisible boy from the back row had grown into the one man who wouldn't let her fall. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stick around until the end, because what happens next will change everything. The rain had been falling on Portland for 3 days straight. Not the gentle kind that whispered against windows, but the persistent gray drumming that turned the city into something blurred and uncertain, where streetlights reflected off wet pavement like scattered stars that had fallen and forgotten how to rise. It was the kind of weather that made people pull their coats tighter, walk faster, and avoid eye contact, the kind that matched the mood of late October perfectly, when the world seemed to be preparing for something darker. Noah Bennett sat at his desk on the 14th floor of the Morrison Building, watching water streak down the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. His office wasn't large, but it was neat. Bookshelves lined with legal volumes, a single photograph of his 8-year-old son Charlie on the corner of his desk, and a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. The room smelled faintly of old paper and the lavender cleaning solution the janitorial staff used on Thursdays. He was tired. The kind of tired that lived in his bones now, a permanent resident that no amount of sleep could evict. Single fatherhood did that. So did family law. Between Charlie's school pickups, soccer practices that always seemed to be scheduled at the worst possible times, and clients whose lives were unraveling in real time, Noah had learned to function in a state of controlled exhaustion. He'd gotten good at it. Good at keeping everything moving, everything together, even when he felt like he was one missed alarm away from collapse. His paralegal, Denise, had left him a stack of new consultation requests before heading out early for her daughter's recital. Noah had been working through them methodically, his mind already half focused on what he'd make for dinner, probably pasta again, Charlie wouldn't complain, when he clicked open the next file and stopped breathing. The name sat there on his screen in stark black letters, Vivian Sterling. For a moment, Noah's entire world condensed into those 2 words. The rain outside went silent. The hum of his computer disappeared. Even his heartbeat seemed to pause, suspended in the space between memory and present reality. Vivian Sterling. It couldn't be the same person. Portland was a big city. Sterling wasn't an uncommon last name. There were probably dozens of Vivian Sterlings in the Pacific Northwest alone. It was statistically improbable that this was her, the girl who had moved through the halls of Lincoln High School 20 years ago like she existed in a different atmosphere than everyone else, untouchable and unaware of her own gravity. But Noah knew, even as he tried to rationalize it, that it was her. He opened the file completely, his hand steady despite the sudden acceleration of his pulse. The details loaded onto his screen. Age 38, CEO of Sterling and Vale Design, a luxury interior design firm with clients across the West Coast. Seeking representation for divorce proceedings. High conflict case. Significant assets involved. Custody dispute over one minor child, female, age 6. There was a photo attached to the file, the kind taken from a corporate website. Even in the small digital frame, she was unmistakable. 20 years had refined her rather than aged her. The soft uncertainty that had clung to teenagers was gone, replaced by something sharper, more defined. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that suggested control, her expression composed and professional. She wore a gray blazer that probably cost more than Noah's monthly mortgage payment, but it was her eyes that stopped him, the same deep brown he remembered, though now they carried something heavier, something that looked like exhaustion disguised as poise. Noah sat back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. Vivian Monroe. That had been her name back then before marriage had changed it. Vivian Monroe, who sat 3 rows ahead of him in AP chemistry and never once turned around. Vivian Monroe, who gave the valedictorian speech at graduation while Noah watched from the back of the football field, already mentally calculating how many shifts he'd need to work that summer to help his mom with rent. Vivian Monroe, who had probably never known his name. He had been no one in high school. Literally invisible to people like her. The quiet kid who came to school in the same rotation of 4 shirts, who never went to parties because he was working the night shift at the grocery store, who ate lunch in the library because it was easier than pretending he belonged in the cafeteria. Noah had learned early that survival meant staying small, staying quiet, staying out of the way. Vivian had been the opposite of invisible. Not because she tried to be noticed. That was the thing Noah had recognized even then, through the fog of his own irrelevance. She hadn't been like the other popular kids who performed their status like it was a full-time job. Vivian had simply been, and that had been enough. Smart without being intimidating, kind without being performative, beautiful in a way that seemed accidental. He remembered the exact moment he'd really seen her for the first time. It was sophomore year, November, during a chemistry lab where they were supposed to be measuring reaction rates. Noah had been paired with Marcus Webb, who spent the entire period trying to convince Noah to let him copy the lab report. Noah had been saying no for the 15th time when there was a small explosion from the station across the room. Nothing dangerous, just someone mixing the wrong chemicals and creating a small pop and a lot of smoke. Everyone had laughed. The teacher had sighed and started lecturing about following instructions. But Noah had noticed Vivian quietly helping the girl who'd made the mistake, Sarah something, he couldn't remember her last name now, cleaning up the spill and whispering the correct measurements so she could start over without feeling humiliated in front of the whole class. It was a small thing, probably meaningless to everyone else. But Noah, who had spent most of his childhood being invisible, had learned to notice the small kindnesses. They were the things that revealed who people really were when they thought no one was watching. After that, he'd been aware of her in a way that felt both painful and inevitable. He noticed when she stayed after class to help Mr. Peterson reorganize the supply closet. He noticed when she brought in homemade cookies for the winter bake sale and didn't make a big deal about it. He noticed that she always said good morning to the janitor, Mr. Chen, and actually waited for his response. Noah had never spoken to her. Not once in 4 years. What would he have said? He was the kid whose shoes had holes in them, whose mom worked 2 jobs just to keep them in their 1-bedroom apartment, who already knew at 16 that college was a fantasy he couldn't afford to entertain. Vivian was going places. You could see it in the way she carried herself, in the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about whether there would be dinner on the table. Their worlds didn't touch. So Noah had done what he always did, watched from a distance, kept his head down, and survived. He'd graduated, worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, and then through law school on scholarships and student loans that he'd only finished paying off 2 years ago. He'd built a life that was small but stable, had a son he loved more than anything, and had learned to find satisfaction in helping people through the worst days of their lives. He never expected those worlds to collide. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Bennett?" It was Cheryl, the receptionist. "Your 4 o'clock is here. Vivian Sterling?" Noah's mouth went dry. He glanced at the clock. 4:02 p.m. She was early. Of course she was. "Give me 2 minutes," he said, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. "Then send her in." "Will do." The intercom clicked off. Noah stood, automatically straightening his tie and running a hand through his hair. He caught his reflection in the window. Still the same serious gray eyes, the same dark hair now showing threads of silver at the temples, the same careful expression he'd learned to wear like armor. He looked older than 38. Life did that to you. He took a breath, then another. This was just another client consultation. He'd done hundreds of them. This was his job, listening to people's pain, organizing their chaos, finding legal pathways through emotional wreckage. The fact that this particular client had once been the girl he'd admired from 3 rows back in chemistry class was irrelevant. It had to be irrelevant. Noah sat back down, pulled up a fresh legal pad, and clicked his pen. Professional, detached, helpful. He could do this. The door opened. Vivian Sterling walked into his office, and Noah felt the 20 years between then and now collapse into nothing. She was taller than he remembered, or maybe it was just the heels. Elegant black pumps that clicked softly against the hardwood floor. The charcoal blazer from her photo was perfectly tailored, worn over a cream silk blouse. Her hair was still pulled back, revealing the clean lines of her face, the high cheekbones, the mouth that was pressed into a line that suggested she was holding something back with considerable effort. But it was her hands that Noah noticed most. They were clenched together in front of her, knuckles white, fingers twisted in a way that contradicted everything else about her composed appearance. It was a tell, the kind Noah had learned to recognize in his years of practice, the physical manifestation of barely controlled fear. "Miss Sterling." Noah stood, extending his hand across the desk. "I'm Noah Bennett. Please have a seat." Her hand was cold when she shook his. Her grip was firm, professional, but he could feel the tremor she was trying to hide. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," she said. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, warm, clear, with a slight rasp that suggested she'd been doing too much talking or not enough sleeping. Probably both. "Of course, please." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat, crossing her legs and placing her purse, black leather, expensive, on the floor beside her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the expanse of his desk, and Noah wondered if there was any flicker of recognition in her eyes. There wasn't. Of course there wasn't. "I appreciate you taking the time," Vivian said again, and Noah realized she was nervous. Vivian Sterling, CEO, successful businesswoman, the girl who had commanded every room she entered in high school, was nervous in his office. "I know family law attorneys are busy, and divorce cases can be complicated." "That's what I'm here for," Noah said gently. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" Something in her shoulders loosened slightly at his tone. He'd learned that too over the years, how to make his voice a safe place, how to create space for people to unravel without judgment. Vivian took a breath. "I'm in the process of divorcing my husband, Grant Sterling. We've been married for 9 years. We have a 6-year-old daughter, Maya." She paused, her jaw tightening. "Grant has been unfaithful. Multiple times. I have proof. Emails, text messages, credit card statements for hotels I never stayed in. I've tried to make it work, for Maya's sake, but I can't anymore. I won't." Noah nodded, making notes on his legal pad. "I understand. Has he admitted to the affairs?" "No." Vivian's laugh was bitter. "He's denied everything, called me paranoid, told me I'm too focused on my career to notice what's happening in my own marriage." She looked down at her hands, still twisted together. "The irony is that he's the one who pushed me to expand the business. Who said we needed the income, the status? And now he's using my success against me." "Tell me about the custody situation," Noah said. This was where Vivian's composure began to crack. "He's threatening to fight me for primary custody of Maya. He's claiming that my work schedule makes me an unfit mother, that I'm never home, that Maya needs stability and I can't provide it." Her voice wavered. "The truth is, Grant has barely been present in her life. He's traveled constantly for his sales job, missed birthdays, missed school events. I'm the one who's been there, even when I had to bring work home, even when I had to take calls during bedtime stories. But he's good at creating narratives, Mr. Bennett. He's very good at making himself look like the victim." Noah kept writing, his face carefully neutral, even as something cold settled in his chest. He'd seen this before. Men who'd been absent fathers suddenly becoming paragons of parenting the moment divorce was mentioned. It was a power play, a way to maintain control, and it was devastatingly effective. "What are your concerns regarding his fitness as a parent?" Noah asked. Vivian met his eyes. "Besides the affairs and the lying, he has a temper. He's never hit me or Maya, but there have been moments, thrown objects, holes punched in walls, shouting that makes Maya hide in her room. He drinks too much, especially lately, and I'm worried about who he brings around her. The women he's been seeing, I don't know them. I don't know if they're safe." Noah set down his pen. "Has he made any specific threats regarding custody or the divorce proceedings?" "Yes." Vivian's voice dropped. "He said he'll destroy me, that he has friends in the media, that he'll make sure everyone knows what kind of mother I really am, that by the time he's done, I'll be lucky to get supervised visitation." She blinked rapidly, and Noah realized she was fighting tears. "He knows exactly what to say to hurt me most. He's had years of practice." The rain outside seemed to intensify, drumming harder against the windows. Noah leaned back in his chair, studying the woman across from him. She was still beautiful, still poised despite the cracks showing through. But he could see what she was trying to hide. The exhaustion that went deeper than lack of sleep, The fear that she was fighting to keep from consuming her, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would believe her and help her fight back. 20 years ago, Noah had been the invisible boy who watched Vivian Monroe from a distance and thought she lived in a different world, one where bad things didn't happen. Now he understood that everyone had their own version of invisible pain. "Miss Sterling," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I believe you, and I'm going to help you." Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since she'd walked into his office, she looked like she might actually breathe. "The first thing we need to do is document everything," Noah continued, shifting into the mode he knew best. The steady, methodical approach that had won him a reputation as one of the best family law attorneys in Portland, despite his relatively small practice. "I need copies of all the evidence you mentioned, the emails, texts, credit card statements. I need a detailed timeline of Grant's absences from Maya's life, including missed events, late nights, business trips. I need any documentation of his temper, photos of damaged property, witnesses who've heard the shouting, anything that establishes a pattern." Vivian was nodding, pulling out her phone. "I have most of it already compiled. I started keeping records 6 months ago when I knew this was inevitable." "Good. That's good." Noah made another note. "We'll also need to establish your relationship with Maya. I'll want to talk to her teachers, her pediatrician, anyone who can speak to your involvement in her daily care. We'll show that while yes, you have a demanding career, you've never let it compromise your role as her mother." "She's my everything," Vivian said softly. "The only good thing that came from this marriage." Noah felt something tighten in his chest. He thought of Charlie, of how much of his own life was built around protecting his son from a world that could be cruel and unpredictable. He understood what it meant to be a parent first and everything else second. "We're going to protect her," he said, "and we're going to protect you, but I need you to be honest with me about everything, no surprises. If there's anything in your past that Grant might use against you, I need to know now." Vivian hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing. I've spent 9 years being exactly what he wanted me to be. The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the successful businesswoman who also kept the house running and made sure we looked good to his friends. I gave up parts of myself I'm still trying to find again, but there's nothing he can use because I've been too busy surviving to make mistakes." The way she said it, with such quiet devastation, made Noah want to stand up and punch Grant Sterling in the face. He didn't, of course. That wasn't how he operated, but the urge was there, sudden and fierce. "All right," he said instead. "Here's what happens next. I'm going to file a response to whatever petition Grant has submitted, if he's already filed. We'll request temporary custody arrangements that prioritize Maya's stability and your existing care routine. We'll also request financial disclosures. I want to see every account, every asset, every debt. If he's hiding money, we'll find it." "He is," Vivian said with certainty. "Hiding money, I mean. I don't have proof yet, but I know Grant. He's been moving funds, probably to offshore accounts or under other people's names. He's been planning this." Noah's expression hardened. "Then we'll be planning better. I have a forensic accountant I work with. She's exceptional at finding money people think they've hidden. If Grant has assets he's not disclosing, we'll uncover them." For the first time since entering his office, Vivian smiled. It was small, fragile, but genuine. "Thank you," she said. "I've talked to 3 other attorneys, and they all made me feel like I was being dramatic, like I should just settle quietly and be grateful for whatever Grant decides to give me." Noah felt anger flash through him again. "You're not being dramatic. You're being protective of yourself and your daughter, and you have every right to fight for what's yours. This is going to be difficult. High-conflict divorces always are. But you're not alone in this anymore." Vivian's eyes glistened. "I've felt alone for a very long time, Mr. Bennett." "Noah," he said. "You can call me Noah." She nodded. "Noah. And please call me Vivian." "Vivian." Her name felt strange in his mouth after all these years of it living only in memory. "We're going to get through this. I promise you that." They spent the next hour going through details, discussing legal strategy, reviewing documents Vivian had brought with her, talking through timelines and expectations. Noah explained his fee structure, which made Vivian blink once but nod in acceptance. He was worth it. His track record proved that, even if his office wasn't in one of the glass towers downtown where the white shoe firms operated. As their meeting drew to a close and the rain outside finally began to soften into mist, Vivian gathered her things and stood. "I know this is probably a standard consultation for you," she said, slinging her purse over her shoulder, "but for me, this is the first time in months that I've felt like maybe I can actually survive this. So thank you. Truly." Noah stood as well, coming around the desk. "You're not just going to survive it, Vivian. You're going to come out the other side stronger." She looked at him for a long moment, and Noah felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. He wondered if she was seeing him at all, or just another attorney in another office promising another outcome. "I hope you're right," she said finally. "I am." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Can I ask you something? It's probably silly, but of course. Have we met before? Not professionally, I mean. There's something familiar about you, and I can't place it." Noah's heart stopped. This was the moment. He could tell her, could say, "Yes, we went to high school together. I sat 3 rows behind you in chemistry and thought you were the most remarkable person I'd ever seen, even though you never knew I existed. But what purpose would that serve except to make this complicated?" She was his client now. She was vulnerable, going through a divorce, fighting for her daughter. The last thing she needed was her attorney revealing some 2-decade-old connection that would only add awkwardness to an already difficult situation. "I don't think so," Noah said smoothly, "but I have one of those faces. People tell me that a lot." Vivian tilted her head, studying him once more. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired and imagining things. Understandable, given what you're dealing with." She smiled again, warmer this time. "I'll send over the documents tonight. And Noah, thank you for believing me. You have no idea how much that means." Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving only the faint scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive, and the sound of the rain against the windows. Noah stood alone in his office, staring at the door, feeling like he'd just survived something he couldn't quite name. After a moment, he walked back to his desk and sat down, pulling up Vivian's file on his computer. He read through her intake information again, memorizing details, already formulating strategy in the back of his mind. This was just another case, he told himself, just another client who needed help. But when he looked at her photo on the screen, at those brown eyes that carried 20 years of life he knew nothing about, Noah knew he was lying to himself. This wasn't just another case. This was Vivian Monroe. And somewhere in the space between who she'd been and who she'd become, Noah felt something shift. Not attraction exactly, though that was there too if he was honest. It was something deeper, a sense of purpose that went beyond professional responsibility. She had been the girl everyone noticed without trying. He had been the invisible boy who survived by staying small. Now she needed someone to see her clearly, to fight for her when she was too exhausted to fight for herself. And Noah, who had spent his entire life being overlooked, suddenly understood that maybe being invisible all those years had been preparing him for this exact moment, to be the person who saw what everyone else missed, to be the one who wouldn't let her fall. His phone buzzed. A text from Charlie's after-school program, running 15 minutes late today. Coach kept them for extra practice. Noah texted back, "No problem. See you soon." He looked at the clock. 5:47 p.m. He had just enough time to review Vivian's documents when they came through and still make it home to start dinner. Maybe not pasta tonight. Maybe he'd try that chicken recipe Charlie had been asking about. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the city washed clean and glistening. The clouds were beginning to break apart, revealing patches of October sky turning gold with the last light of day. Noah saved Vivian's file, shut down his computer, and gathered his things. As he locked his office door and headed for the elevator, he thought about the strange architecture of fate, how 20 years could pass in silence, how 2 lives could run parallel without ever touching, and then one gray afternoon, everything could change because of a name on a screen and a woman walking through a door asking for help. He thought about the girl Vivian had been and the woman she'd become. He thought about the boy he'd been and the man he'd fought to become. And he thought about his son, waiting for him at home, the center of his entire world, the reason Noah had learned to be strong, to be steady, to be someone worth counting on. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, he'd start building Vivian's case, preparing for the battle ahead, standing between her and the man who'd spent years making her feel small. But tonight, Noah would go home and make dinner for his son, because that was who he was now. The invisible boy had grown into the man who showed up. And Vivian Sterling, brilliant, exhausted, fighting to save herself and her daughter, had just become his responsibility. He wouldn't let her down. The elevator doors opened and Noah stepped inside, watching his reflection in the polished metal doors as they slid shut. Same serious eyes, same careful expression, but underneath something had shifted. The story he thought had ended 20 years ago was just beginning. The documents arrived at 11:47 that night, long after Noah had put Charlie to bed and was nursing his second cup of coffee at the kitchen table, his laptop casting blue light across the worn wooden surface. The email notification chimed softly, and when Noah opened Vivian's message, he found himself looking at 9 years of a marriage carefully documented in its dissolution. The subject line was simple: Evidence, V. Sterling. No greeting, no explanation, just files. Dozens of them, organized into folders with clinical precision that somehow made the contents more devastating. Hotel receipts, text message screenshots, credit card statements highlighting charges at restaurants Noah knew Grant Sterling had never taken his wife to. Email exchanges that started professional and descended into something else entirely. Noah clicked through them methodically, his attorney's mind cataloging everything even as something darker settled in his chest. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a pattern of calculated deception spanning years, hidden in plain sight while Vivian had been building her company and raising their daughter, and apparently believing the lies her husband told her about late business meetings and conference trips. One email exchange stopped him cold. It was from 18 months ago, Grant to someone named Melissa. She'll never leave. She's too worried about what people will think, and she loves that little girl too much to risk custody. I can do whatever I want. She's trapped. Noah read it 3 times, felt his jaw clench harder with each pass. He'd seen a lot in his years practicing family law. Cruelty came in many forms, but there was something particularly cold about this kind of arrogance. The certainty that someone's love for their child could be weaponized against them, that devotion was just another tool for control. Grant Sterling had miscalculated, though, because Vivian hadn't stayed trapped. She'd gathered her evidence, made her plans, and walked into Noah's office with her hands shaking but her resolve intact. That took a kind of courage that Noah recognized because he'd had to summon it himself more times than he could count. The courage to do the terrifying thing because staying was worse. He made notes until his coffee went cold, building the skeleton of their case. By the time he finally closed his laptop, it was past 2 in the morning and his eyes felt like sandpaper, but he had a strategy forming. They'd start with the custody arrangement, establish Vivian's primary role in Maya's life, then move to asset disclosure. The forensic accountant, Rebecca Chen, sharp as a blade and relentless, would tear through Grant's finances until every hidden dollar was exposed. Noah stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of sitting, and walked quietly down the hall to check on Charlie. His son was sprawled across his bed in that boneless way kids slept, one arm flung over his stuffed elephant, his face peaceful in the glow of his nightlight. 8 years old and already the best thing Noah had ever done with his life. He thought about Maya Sterling, 6 years old and caught in the crossfire of her parents' war. He thought about Vivian, fighting to protect her daughter the same way Noah would burn the world down to protect Charlie. The next morning came too quickly. Noah dropped Charlie at school, love you kiddo, kill it at math today, and headed to the office with a travel mug of coffee and a mind already running through the day's tasks. He had a court appearance at 10 for another client, then lunch with Rebecca to discuss Vivian's case, then depositions for 2 other ongoing cases. The calendar on his phone looked like a game of Tetris played by someone with anxiety. Denise was already at her desk when he arrived, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she sorted through files. She'd worked with Noah for 6 years now, long enough to read his moods from the way he walked through the door. "Big case?" she asked without looking up. "Could be." Noah shrugged out of his coat. "I'm bringing in Rebecca Chen for forensic accounting. Can you set up a meeting?" Now Denise did look up, eyebrows raised. Rebecca didn't come cheap, and they usually only brought her in for the most complex asset cases. "How big are we talking?" "CEO-level assets, offshore hiding, high-conflict custody dispute." Denise whistled low. "Got it. I'll call her this morning." She paused. "The client good for the fees?" "Yeah." Noah had checked Vivian's financials after she'd left yesterday. Sterling and Vale Design pulled in serious revenue, and Vivian's personal assets were substantial even before accounting for the marital property Grant was undoubtedly trying to hide. She can afford it, and she needs the best. Then she hired the right attorney. Noah shook his head, heading toward his office. Let's win the case before we celebrate. The morning blurred past in the controlled chaos that was his normal. Court appearance, successful, got the temporary custody arrangement his client needed. 3 phone calls with opposing counsel on various cases, each one a careful dance of professional courtesy, masking strategic maneuvering. An email exchange with a mediator about scheduling. A consultation with a new client whose husband had emptied their joint account and disappeared. Family law was trench warfare conducted in conference rooms and courtrooms, and Noah had long ago accepted that victory was usually measured in degrees of harm reduction rather than happy endings. But he was good at it. Good at finding the angle no one else saw, good at building cases that held up under scrutiny, good at the grinding, unglamorous work of protecting people when their lives fell apart. Lunch with Rebecca was at a small Vietnamese place 2 blocks from his office, the kind of restaurant that looked unremarkable from the outside but served pho that could cure existential dread. Rebecca was already there when Noah arrived, her laptop open beside a bowl of soup, her sharp eyes scanning what looked like a spreadsheet dense enough to be hieroglyphics. Noah Bennett. She didn't look up, just gestured to the seat across from her. You only call me when someone's been very naughty with their money. Good to see you too, Rebecca. Noah slid into the booth and ordered his usual from the server, who appeared immediately. And yes, I need you to find where someone's been hiding assets. Tell me everything. Noah laid out the situation, Vivian's suspicions, Grant's behavior patterns, the 9 years of marriage, and the substantial wealth accumulated during that time. Rebecca listened with the focused intensity of a predator tracking prey, making occasional notes on her tablet. Sterling and Vale Design, she said when he finished. I know that company. High-end clients, luxury market. If she's the CEO, we're talking significant income. Which Grant benefited from throughout the marriage, Noah confirmed. Community property state. So he's entitled to half of what was earned during the marriage. But Vivian thinks he's been moving money in preparation for the divorce. They always are. Rebecca took a thoughtful sip of her pho. Men like this, they start planning their exit strategy long before they file paperwork. Offshore accounts in the Caymans or Switzerland, transfers to family members or shell companies. Bitcoin sometimes, though that's actually easier to trace than they think. Artwork purchased under false names. The methods vary, but the arrogance is always the same. Can you find it? Rebecca's smile was sharp. Can I breathe? Of course I can find it, but I'll need full financial disclosure from both parties, subpoena power for bank records, and probably 3 weeks minimum to do a thorough analysis. You'll have everything you need. Noah's food arrived, bun bo hue, spicy and perfect. What are your fees looking like these days? She named a number that would make most people wince. Noah just nodded. Client can handle it. When can you start? Send me what you have today, and I'll clear my schedule for next week. This sounds fun, actually. I haven't had a good chase in months. She tilted her head, studying Noah with the same analytical intensity she probably used on financial statements. You care about this one. It wasn't a question. I care about all my clients, Noah said carefully. Sure you do. But this one's different. I can tell. Noah took a bite of his food, buying himself time. Rebecca was uncomfortably perceptive, which made her excellent at her job, and occasionally annoying in personal interactions. She's being threatened with custody loss by a man who's been unfaithful and dishonest throughout their marriage. She's scared, and she deserves better, that's all. Rebecca didn't sound convinced, but she let it drop. Well, regardless of your motivations, I'll find his money. And when I do, we'll make sure he regrets trying to hide it. They spent the rest of lunch discussing strategy and logistics. By the time Noah headed back to his office, he had Rebecca's retainer agreement drafted and ready for Vivian's signature, and a timeline for the forensic investigation. Progress. Momentum. The things that won cases. The afternoon brought a different kind of challenge. Vivian called at 2:30, and Noah could hear the strain in her voice before she even spoke. Noah, I'm sorry to bother you, but something happened. He immediately put down the brief he'd been reviewing. What is it? Grant showed up at my office an hour ago, just walked past security like he owned the place and came straight to my floor. Her breath hitched. He wanted to talk about custody, said we should work this out between ourselves, that lawyers just make things worse. But the way he was looking at me, the things he was saying, Noah, I'm scared. Noah felt that cold anger return, settling into his bones. What exactly did he say? That I was making a mistake, that I don't know who I'm dealing with, that he has friends in places I can't imagine, and that by the time this is over, I'll be lucky if I can see Maya on weekends. Vivian's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He got close to me, backed me against my desk and said, You think some lawyer is going to save you? You're delusional, Viv. I've been planning this for 2 years. You never even saw it coming. Noah's hand tightened on his phone. Did anyone witness this? My assistant saw him leave my office, but she wasn't in the room for the conversation. I should have recorded it or something, but I was too shocked. It's okay. Here's what we're going to do. Noah was already pulling up forms on his computer. I'm filing for a temporary restraining order today. Grant showing up at your workplace uninvited and making threatening statements is harassment, and it gives us grounds for protection. I'll also request that all communication between you two goes through attorneys only. No direct contact except for emergencies regarding Maya. He's going to be furious. Let him be furious. He doesn't get to intimidate you, Vivian. Not anymore. Noah's tone was harder than he'd intended, but he didn't soften it. I need you to write down everything he said while it's fresh in your memory. Exact words if you can remember them. Time, location, any details about his demeanor or behavior. Email it to me within the hour. Okay, I can do that. Some of the panic eased from her voice. Thank you, Noah. I didn't know who else to call. You call me. Anytime something like this happens, you call me immediately. That's what I'm here for. After they hung up, Noah spent 15 minutes staring at his computer screen, forcing himself to think like an attorney instead of like someone who wanted to drive to Grant Sterling's office and have a very unprofessional conversation about respecting boundaries. The restraining order was the right move legally. But Noah knew men like Grant, wealthy, connected, used to getting their way. A piece of paper wasn't going to stop him if he decided to escalate. They'd have to be strategic, document everything, build a case so airtight that when they walked into family court, the judge would see exactly who Grant Sterling really was beneath the expensive suits and practiced charm. Denise appeared in his doorway. Got a minute? Sure. She came in and closed the door behind her, which meant this was serious. I did some digging on Grant Sterling, called a friend who works in civil litigation downtown. Apparently he's been involved in 2 lawsuits in the past 5 years, both settled out of court. Business disputes where he was accused of fraud and breach of contract. Nothing criminal, and the settlements included NDAs, but it's a pattern. Noah leaned back in his chair. Good work. That'll be useful if we need to establish character. What else? He runs with an expensive crowd. Country club memberships, charity gala circuit, all the right connections. His family has money, old Portland money, the kind that comes with social capital. If this gets ugly, he'll have people willing to vouch for him. Then we'll have people willing to vouch for Vivian. Noah made a note on his legal pad. Her business relationships, her employees, Maya's teachers. We build our own network of credibility. There's one more thing. Denise hesitated. My friend mentioned that Grant has a reputation for being vindictive when crossed. There was a junior associate at his firm who filed an HR complaint about his behavior, hostile work environment, inappropriate comments. She ended up leaving the company, and afterwards she couldn't find work anywhere in her industry for a year. Coincidence, maybe, but people talk. Noah felt his jaw tighten. What happened to the HR complaint? Buried. Grant's uncle sits on the board. It went nowhere. This was the reality they were facing then. Not just a difficult divorce, but a man with the resources and the willingness to destroy anyone who challenged him. A man who'd already proven he'd use his power to silence opposition. But Vivian had something Grant didn't account for. She had Noah. And Noah had spent his entire life learning how to fight from a position of disadvantage, how to outwork, outthink, and outlast people who underestimated him because he didn't come from money or connections or the right side of town. Grant Sterling thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn otherwise. The week accelerated into barely controlled chaos. Noah filed the restraining order, which was granted with a hearing scheduled for the following Monday. Grant's attorney, a partner at one of Portland's most prestigious firms, exactly as expected, sent a tersely worded response objecting to the order and accusing Vivian of manufacturing evidence to gain advantage in the custody dispute. Noah's response was surgical in its precision, citing case law and attaching Vivian's detailed account of the workplace confrontation along with security footage from her building showing Grant entering and leaving at the time she'd specified. The footage didn't capture their conversation, but it established that he'd been there, which contradicted his attorney's initial claim that Grant had been in Seattle on business that day. First lie exposed, many more to come. Rebecca began her financial investigation, and within 3 days sent Noah a preliminary report that made his eyes widen. Grant had been very busy indeed. Transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands totaling nearly $300,000 over the past 18 months. A property purchased in his brother's name, but funded with what appeared to be marital assets. Art acquisitions that weren't disclosed on any of Grant's financial statements. And those were just the obvious moves. Rebecca's note at the bottom of the report said she was finding breadcrumbs, leading to at least 2 more potential hiding spots. "He's not even good at this," she told Noah over the phone, sounding almost insulted. "These are amateur moves. He thought she'd never fight back, so he didn't bother being careful." "His mistake," Noah said. "Oh, it's going to cost him. I'll have the full analysis done by next week. But Noah? We're talking at least $1 million in hidden assets, probably more. This isn't just divorce strategy. This might be fraud." Noah thanked her and hung up, then sat for a long moment staring at the growing file on his desk labeled Sterling versus Sterling. This case was becoming exactly what he'd suspected it would be, a knockdown, drag-out fight, where Grant would use every advantage he had, and Noah would have to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than a man who'd spent his whole life believing the rules didn't apply to him. He was ready for it. What he wasn't ready for was how much time he was spending thinking about Vivian outside of case strategy. It started small, wondering if she'd eaten lunch when she sent him emails at 1 p.m. marked as sent from her phone, clearly written while she was doing 6 other things. Noticing the timestamps on her messages, how many came after midnight, how she was probably running herself into the ground trying to manage her company, prepare for the divorce, and be present for Maya. Remembering small details from their first meeting, the way her hands had twisted together, the exhaustion she'd tried to hide. Professional concern, he told himself. He cared about all his clients' well-being, but he didn't check his phone hoping for emails from all his clients. He didn't find himself reviewing case files at night and getting distracted by memories of how Vivian's voice had sounded when she'd thanked him for believing her, like she'd been holding her breath waiting for someone to finally see the truth. And he definitely didn't lie awake thinking about chemistry class 20 years ago, wondering what his life might have looked like if he'd been brave enough to speak to her even once. If anything would have been different. If they'd have ended up here anyway, in some cosmic inevitability neither of them could have predicted. Charlie noticed his distraction at breakfast one morning. "Dad, you're making weird toast." Noah looked down at the piece of bread he'd been buttering and realized he'd been doing it for probably 2 full minutes. It was more butter than bread at this point. "Sorry, buddy, thinking about work." Must be a big case. Charlie was 8 but observant in the way kids were when they'd spent their whole lives reading their parents' moods for stability. "You've been looking at your phone a lot." "Yeah, it's complicated." Noah scraped off some of the excess butter and tried again. "But that's not your job to worry about. How's the book report coming?" Charlie made a face. "I hate writing about books. Why can't I just tell Mrs. Anderson what happened?" "Because writing helps you think through the story more carefully. You notice things you missed the first time." "Did you read a lot of books when you were a kid?" Noah thought about the library where he'd spent his lunch periods, the worn paperbacks he'd checked out because they were free and he'd needed to disappear into other worlds for a while. "Yeah, I did. Reading was important to me." "Because you didn't have a phone?" Noah laughed despite himself. "Yes, Charlie, because I didn't have a phone. We had to entertain ourselves with ancient technology like books and outside." "That sounds terrible." "It built character." They finished breakfast in comfortable quiet, Charlie chattering about his upcoming soccer game while Noah made lunch and checked the calendar. He had a meeting with Vivian at 10 to review Rebecca's preliminary findings and discuss strategy for the restraining order hearing. Then depositions in the afternoon for another case. Then home for dinner and homework supervision and the bedtime routine that anchored his days. This was his life, structured, manageable, built around being the stable presence Charlie needed. There wasn't room for complications. There definitely wasn't room for the way his pulse kicked up when Vivian walked into his office at 9:58, 2 minutes early as always, wearing a navy dress that was probably meant to be professional, but somehow just made her look elegant and tired and determined all at once. "Good morning," she said, and Noah heard the strain underneath the greeting. "Morning. Coffee?" He gestured to the pot he'd brewed fresh 10 minutes ago. "Please, I've been up since 4 dealing with a supplier crisis in San Francisco, and I'm running on fumes." Noah poured her a cup, black, no sugar, he'd learned from their previous meetings, and handed it to her as she settled into the chair across from his desk. She took a sip and closed her eyes briefly, and Noah looked away from the vulnerable curve of her neck, focusing instead on the files in front of him. "So," he began, "Rebecca sent over her preliminary financial analysis. It's good news for us, bad news for Grant." Vivian's eyes opened. "How bad?" "He's been hiding assets, a lot of them." Noah turned his monitor so she could see the summary. Offshore accounts, property in his brother's name, undisclosed art purchases. Rebecca is still digging, but we're looking at well over $1 million in marital assets he's attempted to conceal. Vivian stared at the screen, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. $1 million. At least. Possibly more. "I knew he was moving money. I knew it, but She set down the coffee before she spilled it, her hands shaking. "That's money that should have gone to Maya's future, to her college fund. And he just took it?" "We're going to get it back," Noah said firmly. "All of it. And the fact that he tried to hide it actually helps our case. The court doesn't look kindly on financial dishonesty, especially when there's a child involved. This establishes a pattern of deception that supports everything else we're arguing." Vivian pressed her fingers to her temples. "Sometimes I feel crazy, you know? Like I invented this version of him in my head because I wanted out of the marriage and needed a villain to justify it. But then I see evidence like this, and I realize I actually underestimated how bad it was." "You're not crazy. You were surviving." Noah kept his voice gentle. "When you're living in a situation like that, your brain does what it needs to do to get you through each day. Sometimes that means minimizing, convincing yourself it's not as bad as it feels. But the evidence doesn't lie, Vivian. Grant has been deceiving you for years, and you had every reason to leave." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "I don't. I just try to tell the truth as I see it." "Well, your truth is very reassuring." She picked up her coffee again, steadier now. "What happens next?" They spent the next hour reviewing strategy. The restraining order hearing on Monday would establish boundaries and set the tone for how the court viewed Grant's behavior. Rebecca would complete her financial analysis by the end of next week, giving them ammunition for asset disclosure demands. They'd file for temporary custody arrangements that maintained Maya's current schedule with Vivian as primary parent, and they'd begin building their witness list: teachers, pediatricians, business associates, anyone who could speak to Vivian's character in Grant's absences. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," Noah warned. "Grant knows we've found the hidden assets by now. His attorney will have told him we requested the financial records. He's going to escalate. More threats, more attempts to intimidate you or damage your reputation. We need to be prepared for that. I'm already getting emails from people asking if the rumors about my marriage are true. Mutual friends? Business contacts?" Vivian's smile was bitter. "Grant's been talking, painting himself as the wounded husband whose wife chose her career over their family. Let him talk. When we get to court, we'll have documentation and evidence. He'll have hearsay and lies." Noah made a note. "But save those emails. Everything goes in the file. Every contact from him or from people who might be acting on his behalf." "You really think he'd send other people to harass me?" "I think he'll do whatever he thinks will work. And I think he's underestimated you, which is his second big mistake after marrying you in the first place." Vivian laughed, surprised and genuine. "Was that a joke? Did my very serious attorney just make a joke?" Noah felt his face warm. I've been known to have a sense of humor, occasionally, when the situation warrants it. I'll have to watch for those rare moments. Her smile softened. Thank you, Noah. Not just for the legal work, but for making this bearable. I don't know what I'd do without you. The words settled between them, carrying more weight than they should. Noah felt the shift again, that dangerous pull toward something that couldn't happen while she was his client, while she was vulnerable and trusting him to navigate her through the worst period of her life. He cleared his throat and looked back at his notes. We should discuss the custody evaluation. The court will likely order one given Grant's petition for primary custody. That means a psychologist will interview both of you, observe you with Maya, and make recommendations to the judge. Will they see through him? Vivian asked quietly. Or will they see the version of Grant that everyone else sees? The successful businessman? The charming personality? They're trained to see past performances, but we'll prepare you thoroughly. And Vivian? Noah waited until she met his eyes. You're a good mother? That's going to come through regardless of what Grant tries to stage. Trust that. She nodded, but Noah could see the fear still there, lurking beneath her composure. The fear every parent had when their child's future hung in the balance, when the thing you'd built your entire life around could be taken away by a judge's decision. He understood that fear intimately. After Vivian left, Noah sat alone in his office and thought about the irony of it all. 20 years ago, he'd watched Vivian Monroe from 3 rows back and thought she lived in a world without problems, where everything came easily. Now he knew better. Success didn't protect you from pain. Money didn't prevent betrayal. And the woman he'd once thought existed in some higher atmosphere of ease and privilege had actually been trapped in a marriage that was slowly dismantling her piece by piece. Everyone carried invisible weight. The difference was whether you had someone willing to help you carry it. Noah pulled up his calendar and started clearing space for the next 3 weeks. This case was going to consume him. Late nights, weekend work, every spare moment dedicated to building Vivian's defense and dismantling Grant's offense. It was what he did, what he'd always done. Show up. Work harder. Be the person people could count on when everything else fell apart. And if somewhere it's the process, he was also protecting the girl from chemistry class who'd been kind when she didn't have to be, who'd helped someone when no one was watching, who'd been remarkable without even trying. Well, that was just a detail he'd keep to himself. Outside his window, Portland stretched out in its November gray, rain threatening again in the heavy clouds. Noah watched the city for a moment, thinking about all the lives moving through it, separate, parallel, occasionally intersecting in ways that changed everything. Then he turned back to his computer and got to work. The hearing room on the 3rd floor of the Multnomah County Courthouse smelled like old wood and anxiety. Noah had been in this particular courtroom dozens of times, knew every scuff mark on the floor, every angle of light that came through the tall windows on bright days. Today wasn't bright. The sky outside hung low and gray, pressing down on the city like a held breath. He sat at the petitioner's table with Vivian beside him, her hands folded in her lap with that same white-knuckled tension he'd first noticed in his office 3 weeks ago. She wore a charcoal suit, conservative and professional, her hair pulled back simply. No jewelry except small pearl earrings and her wedding ring, which she hadn't yet removed. Noah had advised her to keep wearing it for now. Small details mattered in family court, and they didn't want to give Grant's attorney any ammunition about her rushing to end the marriage. Grant sat 20 feet away at the respondent's table with his attorney, Marcus Rothman, a silver-haired partner from Whitmore and Associates, who wore custom suits and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Grant looked every inch the successful businessman in his navy pinstripe, his expression carefully calibrated to project wounded dignity. He hadn't looked at Vivian once since they'd entered the courtroom, but Noah had caught him staring when they'd been in the hallway earlier, and the look in Grant's eyes had been pure calculation. Not anger, not hurt, just cold assessment, like Vivian was a problem he was working out how to solve. It had made Noah want to step between them on instinct, the same way he'd position himself between Charlie and anything that might hurt him. He'd resisted the urge, keeping his expression neutral and professional, but the protective impulse had been there, immediate and fierce. Judge Patricia Henley entered from her chambers, and everyone stood. She was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with a reputation for cutting through pretense and having zero tolerance for games. Noah had appeared before her 4 times in the past 2 years and won 3 of those cases. She was fair, which was all he could ask for. Please be seated. Judge Henley settled behind the bench and opened the file in front of her. We're here for a temporary restraining order hearing in the matter of Sterling versus Sterling. Mr. Bennett, you're representing the petitioner? Yes, Your Honor. Noah stood. Noah Bennett, on behalf of Vivian Sterling. Mr. Rothman for the respondent? Marcus Rothman rose with practiced ease. That's correct, Your Honor. Marcus Rothman representing Grant Sterling. Very well. Judge Henley scanned the documents. Mr. Bennett, you've petitioned for a temporary restraining order preventing Mr. Grant Sterling from contacting your client except through counsel and prohibiting him from coming within 100 feet of her residence and workplace. That's a serious request. I've read your filing, but I'd like to hear your argument. Noah moved to the podium, his notes in hand though he barely needed them. He'd spent hours preparing for this hearing, anticipating every counter-argument Rothman would make, every question the judge might ask. Your Honor, my client is seeking this protection order based on a pattern of threatening and harassing behavior from Mr. Sterling that has escalated since she filed for divorce. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Sterling appeared uninvited at Ms. Sterling's workplace, bypassing building security to confront her in her private office. During that confrontation, he made explicit threats regarding the custody of their 6-year-old daughter and her professional reputation. Judge Henley looked up. Do you have documentation of this incident? We do, Your Honor. Ms. Sterling provided a written account immediately following the incident, and we have security footage from her building showing Mr. Sterling entering and leaving at the times she specified. While the footage doesn't capture their conversation, it establishes his presence at her workplace during business hours, contradicting his initial denial that the meeting occurred. Noah placed the documents on the bench. Judge Henley reviewed them while the courtroom sat in tense silence. Vivian's breathing was barely audible beside him, shallow and controlled. Mr. Rothman, the judge said without looking up, your client initially denied being at Ms. Sterling's office on this date. Rothman stood smoothly. There was some confusion about the timeline, Your Honor. Mr. Sterling has a demanding travel schedule, and he initially believed he'd been in Seattle that day. Upon reviewing his calendar more carefully, he acknowledges that he did stop by his wife's office briefly to discuss their daughter's upcoming school event. Briefly. Judge Henley's tone was dry. Security footage shows him there for 43 minutes. My client was attempting to have a civil conversation with his wife about co-parenting, Your Honor. If the conversation extended beyond what he initially remembered, that speaks to his commitment to trying to resolve their differences amicably rather than through litigation. Noah remained standing. Your Honor, there was nothing amicable about Mr. Sterling's behavior. He backed Ms. Sterling against her desk and told her, and I quote from her written statement, "You think some lawyer is going to save you? I've been planning this for 2 years. You never saw it coming." He then proceeded to threaten that she would be lucky to see her daughter on weekends by the time he was finished with her. These are Ms. Sterling's characterizations, Your Honor, Rothman interjected. My client maintains that he was attempting to discuss custody arrangements and that Ms. Sterling, who had recently retained counsel, misinterpreted his genuine concern as threatening. Judge Henley set down the documents. Ms. Sterling is present in court today? Yes, Your Honor, Noah said. I'd like to hear from her directly. Ms. Sterling, please approach. Vivian stood, and Noah caught the slight tremor in her hands as she moved to the witness stand. She was sworn in, her voice steady, despite the tension Noah could see in her shoulders. Judge Henley studied her for a moment. Ms. Sterling, tell me in your own words what happened when your husband came to your office on October 23rd. Vivian took a breath. I was in a meeting with my design director when my assistant called to say Grant was there. I was surprised. We'd agreed to communicate through our attorneys about divorce matters. When I went to my office, he was already inside, waiting. He closed the door behind me. Did that concern you? Yes. Grant had been angry about the divorce filing. We'd had several text exchanges where he'd accused me of trying to destroy our family, of being selfish. I knew he wasn't there to have a friendly conversation about Maya's school play. What did he say to you? Vivian's voice remained level, but Noah saw her grip tighten on the edge of the witness box. He told me I was making a mistake, that I didn't understand who I was dealing with. He said he had connections, resources I couldn't imagine, and that he'd been preparing for this divorce for 2 years while I'd been oblivious. Then he moved closer, backing me against my desk, and said my lawyer couldn't save me, that by the time he was done, I'd be fortunate to see Maya every other weekend. How did you feel during this interaction? Terrified. The word came out quiet but absolute. Grant is a large man, Your Honor. He's 6'2", over 200 pounds. I'm 5'6". When he got close to me like that, blocking my ability to move away, I genuinely feared for my safety. I've never seen him that cold, that calculated. It wasn't anger, it was a threat, delivered calmly so I would know he meant every word. Judge Henley made notes. Has your husband ever been physically violent with you? Not directly, but he has a temper. He's put holes in walls, thrown objects. 3 months ago, he shattered a glass against the kitchen wall during an argument, and Maya was in the next room. The broken glass came within feet of where she was sitting. Rothman was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Ms. Sterling is introducing allegations beyond the scope of this hearing, attempting to prejudice the court against my client with unsubstantiated claims. This is a restraining order hearing, Mr. Rothman. Miss Sterling's perception of threat is absolutely relevant. Judge Henley turned back to Vivian. After the incident in your office, what happened? Grant left, but that night, he sent me a text message saying, "You have no idea what's coming." I forwarded it to Mr. Bennett immediately. Do you fear for your safety or your daughter's safety if your husband continues to have unrestricted access to contact you? Vivian met the judge's eyes directly. Yes, Your Honor, I do. Grant is someone who needs to be in control. The divorce has taken that control away from him, and I believe he'll do whatever he thinks is necessary to get it back. I'm not asking for permanent separation. I understand he has a right to see our daughter. But I need the communication to go through our attorneys so there's documentation. So I'm not alone with him, so Maya isn't exposed to his anger when things don't go his way. Thank you, Ms. Sterling. You may step down. Vivian returned to her seat, and Noah briefly touched her hand under the table, a quick reassurance that she'd done well. She'd been honest, clear, and credible, exactly what they needed. Judge Henley turned to Rothman. Does your client wish to testify? Rothman glanced at Grant, and something passed between them. No, Your Honor. Mr. Sterling maintains that this entire petition is a strategic maneuver to gain advantage in custody proceedings, but he's willing to abide by a modified communication order if the court deems it necessary. Modified how? Communication through counsel except for emergencies directly involving their daughter. No proximity restrictions. Mr. Sterling has legitimate business reasons to be in the downtown area where his wife's office is located, and limiting his movement in that way is overly broad. Noah stood. Your Honor, the workplace restriction is essential. Mr. Sterling has already demonstrated his willingness to use his wife's professional environment to intimidate her. She needs to be able to work without fear that he'll appear at any moment. There are multiple routes through downtown that don't require him to come within 100 feet of her building. Judge Henley considered this, tapping her pen against the bench. The silence stretched long enough that Noah could hear someone's phone vibrating in the gallery behind them. Finally, she spoke. Here's my ruling. I'm granting a temporary restraining order with the following provisions. Mr. Grant Sterling is prohibited from directly contacting Ms. Vivian Sterling except through his attorney or in cases of genuine emergency regarding their daughter Maya. All non-emergency communication regarding custody, finances, or divorce proceedings must go through counsel. Mr. Sterling is prohibited from coming within 100 feet of Ms. Sterling's residence and workplace unless he has legitimate business in those buildings unrelated to his wife, in which case he must notify her attorney in advance and must not approach or attempt to communicate with Ms. Sterling. Rothman started to object, but Judge Henley held up a hand. This is a temporary order, Mr. Rothman. If your client feels it's unjust, he can petition for modification once he's demonstrated the ability to communicate appropriately. But based on Ms. Sterling's testimony and the documentation provided, I find there's sufficient cause for concern to warrant protection while this divorce proceeds. This order will remain in effect until the final custody hearing or until modified by this court. Are we clear? Yes, Your Honor, Noah and Rothman said in unison. Good. I'm also ordering a custody evaluation to be completed by Dr. Sarah Chen. Both parties will participate fully and make the child available for observation. The evaluation will be submitted to the court no less than 2 weeks prior to the custody hearing, which I'm scheduling for January 15th. That gives everyone 2 months to complete discovery, depositions, and evaluation processes. Judge Henley closed the file. Anything else? No, Your Honor, Noah said. Then we're adjourned. The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to echo in Noah's chest. They'd won. Not completely. Rothman had managed to soften the proximity restrictions slightly, but they'd established court protection for Vivian and set boundaries Grant would violate at his own legal peril. Noah gathered his materials while Vivian sat motionless beside him, processing. Across the aisle, Grant stood abruptly and walked out without a word to his attorney, his movement sharp with barely contained fury. Rothman followed more slowly, shooting Noah a look that promised this was far from over. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Vivian finally exhaled, leaning against the wall. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. Sitting 10 feet from him, knowing he was listening to everything I said. You were perfect, Noah told her. Calm, credible, specific. Exactly what Judge Henley needed to hear. He's going to be so angry. Let him be angry through his attorney. That's what the order is for. Noah checked his watch. Do you have time for coffee? We should talk about next steps. Vivian nodded, then hesitated. Actually, could we walk instead? I need air. I feel like I've been holding my breath for hours. Of course. They left the courthouse and headed toward the waterfront, walking in silence for the first few blocks. The day was cold and damp, typical November weather, but at least the rain was holding off. Vivian had wrapped her arms around herself, and Noah noticed she wasn't wearing a coat heavy enough for the temperature. Here. He shrugged out of his suit jacket and held it out. Noah, you'll freeze. I'm fine. Take it. She did, pulling it around her shoulders. It was too large, but she didn't seem to mind, just drew it closer and kept walking. Noah tried not to think about how the simple gesture felt oddly intimate, how his jacket looked on her, how she'd accepted it without further protest, like maybe she trusted him enough to let him take care of her in small ways. They reached the seawall overlooking the Willamette River, the water dark and choppy under the gray sky. A few hardy joggers passed by, but mostly they had this stretch of waterfront to themselves. I keep waiting to feel relief, Vivian said finally. We got the restraining order. That's what we wanted. But I just feel exhausted, scared, like this is never going to end. She looked at him surprised. Yes, all of that. It's normal, Noah said. You've been in survival mode for weeks, probably months. Your body is running on adrenaline, and every legal victory feels temporary because you know there's another battle coming. It's going to feel like this until it's over, and even then, you'll probably need time to trust that it's actually finished. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Noah leaned against the railing, watching a barge move slowly upriver. Different circumstances, but yeah, when Charlie's mother left, when I was fighting for custody and trying to finish law school and working nights to pay rent, there was about a 2-year period where I never felt like I could breathe all the way. Every time something went right, I was just waiting for the next crisis. Vivian turned to face him fully. You've never mentioned Charlie's mother before. Not much to tell. We were young, not ready to be parents. She tried for about 6 months after he was born, then decided she didn't want the responsibility. Signed over custody and moved to California. Sends a birthday card every year, usually late. That's the extent of her involvement. I'm sorry. Noah shrugged. It was hard at the time, but honestly, Charlie's better off. A parent who doesn't want to be there does more damage than one who's absent. You and I both know that. Grant wanted to be a father when Maya was born, Vivian said quietly. Or at least, he wanted the idea of being a father. The perfect family to show off at company events. But the actual work of parenting, the late nights, the endless needs, the way children require you to be selfless, he couldn't handle it. So he traveled more, worked later, found excuses to be absent. And I covered for him. Told Maya that Daddy was busy, that he loved her even when he missed her recital or her birthday party. I enabled his absence because I thought that's what keeping a family together meant. You were protecting her. That's not the same as enabling him. Isn't it? Vivian's voice was rough. I made excuses for years, Noah. I convinced myself that a father who was barely there was better than no father at all. And now I'm in court fighting to limit his custody because I finally admitted what I should have seen all along. He's not actually interested in being her father. He's interested in winning. Noah chose his words carefully. You loved your daughter enough to try to make it work. That's not weakness. But now you love her enough to fight for what she actually needs instead of what you wished her father could be. That takes a different kind of strength. Vivian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. How do you always know what to say? I don't. I'm just telling you what I see. Noah paused, then added, and what I see is someone who's been carrying this alone for too long. You're allowed to be tired, Vivian. You're allowed to feel like this is hard, because it is. A tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. She brushed it away impatiently. I can't afford to be tired. I have a company to run, a daughter who needs me to be strong, and a legal battle that requires me to be perfect every second because one mistake could cost me everything. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you. That's enough. For Maya, maybe. But for the court? For the custody evaluation? Vivian shook her head. Dr. Chen is going to be watching everything. How I interact with Maya, how clean my house is, whether I'm too focused on work or not focused enough. Grant will perform perfectly. He's good at short-term performances, and I'll be the one actually living my real life with all its messy imperfections. Dr. Chen is good at her job. I've worked with her before. She doesn't fall for performances. She looks for genuine connection, stability, who the child turns to for comfort. You have all of that. Grant has money and charm, but Maya knows who her real parent is. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, watching the river. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer. Can I ask you something? Why did you become a family law attorney? It seems like the kind of work that would break your heart over and over. Noah considered the question. He'd been asked variations of it before, usually by people who couldn't understand why anyone would voluntarily spend their days immersed in other people's worst moments. The easy answer was that it paid reasonably well, and he was good at it. But Vivian deserved more than the easy answer. My parents divorced when I was 7, he said. It was ugly. My dad fought for custody not because he actually wanted me, but because he didn't want my mom to have me. Like I was property to be divided up, not a kid who was scared and confused and just wanted them to stop screaming at each other. What happened? My mom won custody, but barely. My dad got weekends, which he used for about 6 months before he stopped showing up. I'd wait by the window every other Friday, convinced this time would be different. This time he'd remember he had a son. My mom would try to distract me, make plans for us to do something fun instead, but I could see how much it hurt her to watch me hope for someone who kept choosing not to show up. Vivian's hand moved to his arm, a light touch. Noah, it's okay. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because that experience, watching my mom fight for me, seeing how hard she worked to give me stability, even when she was working 2 jobs and exhausted all the time. That's why I do this. I became an attorney because I wanted to be the person who fights for the parents who actually show up, who protects kids from being used as weapons, who makes sure that when families fall apart, at least someone's focused on what's actually best for the children involved. Your mom sounds like an incredible person. She was. Noah's throat tightened. She died when I was in law school. Heart attack. She was only 52, but a lifetime of stress and overwork catches up eventually. She never got to see me graduate, never met Charlie. But everything I am, everything I know about being a parent, I learned from watching her. Vivian's hand was still on his arm, and Noah was acutely aware of the contact, the warmth of it, through his shirt sleeve. She'd be proud of you. The man you became, the father you are, the way you help people. I hope so. Noah cleared his throat, suddenly conscious of how personal this conversation had become, how far they'd drifted from the professional boundaries he usually maintained so carefully. Anyway, that's why I do what I do. And that's why I'm not going to let Grant Sterling use Maya as a pawn in his ego game. You're fighting for your daughter because you love her. He's fighting for custody because he wants to hurt you. Judge Henley will see the difference, and so will Dr. Chen. Vivian withdrew her hand, but slowly, like she was reluctant to break the connection. I believe you. When you say it like that, I actually believe it might be okay. It will be. But we have a lot of work ahead. Rebecca should have the final financial analysis done by end of this week. Once we have that, we can push for full asset disclosure and start negotiating settlement terms. And we need to prepare you thoroughly for the custody evaluation. What does that involve? Doctor, Chen will interview both you and Grant separately, observe each of you with Maya in your respective homes, and talk to Maya herself in an age-appropriate way. She'll also contact Maya's teachers, pediatrician, anyone who interacts with her regularly. The goal is to build a complete picture of Maya's life and determine what custody arrangement serves her best interests. Vivian wrapped Noah's jacket tighter around herself. What should I do? To prepare, I mean. Be yourself. Don't try to stage anything or present some perfect version of parenting. Dr. Chen has seen it all. She can tell the difference between genuine interaction and performance. Just be the mother you are every day. Let Maya be herself. Show Dr. Chen your normal routine, how you handle bedtime and homework, and the ordinary chaos of raising a 6-year-old. What if my ordinary chaos looks like failure? I work long hours, Noah. There are nights when Maya eats cereal for dinner because I had a client emergency. Times when I'm on my laptop during her bath time because a project deadline moved up. I'm not PTA president or room parent. I don't make elaborate lunches shaped like cartoon characters. I'm just trying my best, and sometimes my best looks pretty mediocre. Noah turned to face her fully. Vivian, listen to me. You're describing normal parenting, real parenting. Maya doesn't need perfection. She needs consistency, love, and a parent who shows up even when it's hard. You've been doing that her entire life while simultaneously building a successful company and dealing with a husband who was actively undermining you. The fact that you're worried about not being good enough? That actually proves you're a good mother. Bad parents don't worry about that. Grant doesn't worry about it. Exactly, because Grant isn't parenting. He's performing the idea of being a father when it's convenient or advantageous. There's a difference, and Maya knows it even if she can't articulate it yet. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression that Noah couldn't quite read. You remind me of someone. Yeah? From a long time ago. I can't quite place it, but there's something familiar about the way you see things, the way you cut through all the noise and just tell the truth. Noah's heart kicked uncomfortably. This was dangerous territory. They were standing too close, talking too personally, and Vivian was looking at him like he might be more than just her attorney. Like maybe she was starting to see him the way he'd always seen her, as someone remarkable who deserved so much better than what life had handed her. He stepped back slightly, creating distance. We should head back. I have a deposition at 3, and you probably need to get back to your office. If Vivian noticed the withdrawal, she didn't comment on it. She just nodded and slipped out of his jacket, handing it back to him. Thank you for the jacket, for the walk, for listening, for all of it. That's what I'm here for. They walked back toward the courthouse parking garage in a silence that felt different now, weighted with things unsaid. When they reached Vivian's car, a sleek Audi that probably cost more than Noah made in 6 months, she paused before getting in. Noah? The thing you said about your father not showing up, about waiting by the window? She met his eyes. I'm sorry that happened to you. No child should have to learn that kind of disappointment. It made me who I am, not all bad. No, not bad at all. She smiled, small and genuine. I'll see you Friday for our prep meeting? Friday, 2 o'clock. He watched her drive away, then stood in the parking garage for a moment longer than necessary, thinking about chemistry class and invisible boys and the strange way the past kept reaching into the present, rearranging everything you thought you knew about your own story. His phone buzzed. A text from Charlie's school. Early dismissal today for teacher training. Can you pick up at 1:30? Noah checked his watch. He could make it if he skipped lunch and pushed the deposition back an hour. He texted back confirmation, then headed for his own car. This was his life. Court hearings and school pickups, legal strategy and homework help, late nights working and early mornings making breakfast. It was full and demanding and sometimes overwhelming, but it was his. He'd built it carefully, deliberately, creating stability for Charlie in a world that could be unpredictable and cruel. There wasn't room for complications. There especially wasn't room for feelings about a client who was vulnerable and trusting him to navigate her through the worst period of her life. But as Noah drove toward Charlie's school, he couldn't quite shake the memory of Vivian's hand on his arm, the way she'd looked at him when he'd told her about his mother, the warmth of connection that had nothing to do with legal strategy, and everything to do with two people recognizing something in each other that went deeper than professional obligation. He was in trouble. He'd been in trouble since the moment her name appeared on his screen 3 weeks ago, and the case was only going to get more intense from here. Noah pulled into the school parking lot and took a breath, forcing himself back into the present moment. Charlie would come running out any second, full of energy and stories about his day, needing his dad to be fully present and focused. Everything else, Vivian, the case, the dangerous feelings he was trying to ignore, would have to wait. Because this was what mattered most. This had always been what mattered most. The school doors opened and Charlie appeared, his backpack bouncing as he ran toward the car. Noah got out to meet him, catching him in a hug that made his son laugh and complain about being squeezed too tight. "Dad, I aced my math test. That's my guy. I knew you would. Can we get ice cream to celebrate?" Noah ruffled his hair. "It's 40 degrees outside." "Ice cream doesn't care about temperature, Dad. Ice cream is timeless." Though despite everything, the hearing, the case, the complicated tangle of past and present, and feelings he shouldn't be having. Noah laughed. Real and genuine and grounding. "All right, ice cream it is, but just a small one, and then you're doing homework before dinner. Deal." They got in the car, Charlie chattering about his day, and Noah drove toward their favorite ice cream place on Hawthorne. The deposition could wait another hour. Rebecca's call about the financial analysis could wait. Everything could wait. Because right now, his son needed ice cream and attention, and the simple certainty that his dad would show up for the small moments as much as the big ones. This was who Noah was. This was who he'd always be. Everything else was just noise. But even as he thought it, even as he listened to Charlie describe the intricacies of playground politics, and who was friends with who this week, a small part of Noah's mind stayed with Vivian, wondering if she'd made it back to her office safely, hoping Grant would respect the restraining order, thinking about the custody evaluation ahead and all the ways they'd need to prepare, caring more than an attorney probably should, which was exactly the problem. Rebecca's final report arrived on a Tuesday morning when the rain was coming down so hard that Noah could barely see the building across the street from his office window. The email notification appeared at 6:47 a.m., while he was still at home making Charlie's lunch and trying to convince his son that yes, he did need to wear a jacket, even though he claimed 8-year-olds were naturally immune to cold. Noah didn't open the report until he got to the office an hour later, coffee in hand and his shirt slightly damp from the sprint between the parking garage and the building entrance. When he finally clicked on the PDF, he had to read the summary twice to make sure he was seeing the numbers correctly. Grant Sterling had hidden $1.8 million in marital assets. Not the million Rebecca had estimated in her preliminary analysis. Nearly twice that. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Jersey. A property in Bend purchased under his brother's name, but funded entirely with marital money. Art and collectibles stored in a private facility, never disclosed. Stock options transferred to shell companies. And this was the piece that made Noah's blood run cold, a separate bank account that had been receiving regular transfers for the past 3 years, currently holding $340,000. Rebecca's note at the bottom of the financial section was characteristically blunt. "He's been planning this divorce for at least 3 years. This isn't opportunistic hiding. This is systematic theft from the marital estate. The $340,000 account? That's his freedom fund. Money to live on while he drags out the divorce and tries to starve her into a bad settlement. He's not just dishonest, he's calculated." Noah sat back in his chair, the report still glowing on his screen. 3 years. Grant had been preparing to leave Vivian for 3 years while still sharing her bed, still playing the role of husband, still letting her believe they were building a life together. And all the while, he'd been systematically moving their money, piece by piece, building his escape route and making sure when he finally pulled the trigger, Vivian would be left scrambling. Except Grant had miscalculated in one crucial way. He'd underestimated Vivian's willingness to fight back. And he'd never anticipated she'd hire someone like Noah, who'd grown up poor enough to understand exactly how the wealthy hid money and exactly how to find it again. Noah forwarded the report to Vivian with a message. "We need to meet today. This is significant. Call me when you have a chance." Her response came within 5 minutes. "My office, 11 a.m. I can clear my morning." He replied with confirmation, then spent the next 3 hours preparing for the conversation. This report changed everything. They weren't just fighting over custody and a fair division of assets anymore. They had evidence of fraud, of intentional concealment, of Grant actively stealing from the marital estate while pretending to be a faithful husband. The court was going to eviscerate him. At 10:45, Noah grabbed his laptop and the printed copy of Rebecca's report and headed out into the rain. Vivian's office was in the Pearl District, occupying the entire top floor of a renovated warehouse building. Sterling and Vale design had that carefully curated aesthetic that wealthy people paid for. Exposed brick and modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, plants that looked too healthy to be real, but somehow were. The receptionist recognized Noah from his previous visits and waved him through. "Miss Sterling's expecting you. Conference room B." He found Vivian standing at the window wall, looking out over the rain-soaked city. She'd changed since their last meeting, looked thinner, more tired, the kind of exhaustion that lived in bones and couldn't be hidden by expensive clothes or good posture. She wore black pants and a cream sweater, her hair down for once, and when she turned at the sound of the door, Noah saw shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Is it that bad?" "It's that good, actually, for us. Bad for Grant." Noah set his laptop on the conference table and opened Rebecca's report. "Sit down. You're going to want to be sitting for this." Vivian settled into a chair, her hands already moving to that familiar twisted position in her lap. Noah sat across from her and turned the laptop so she could see the screen. "Rebecca found everything," he said. "Grant has been hiding assets for at least 3 years. We're talking $1.8 million that he systematically moved out of your reach, thinking you'd never find it." Vivian stared at the numbers, her face going pale. 1.8 million. Offshore accounts, hidden property, undisclosed investments, and a personal account he's been funding as his war chest for the divorce. Noah walked her through each discovery, watching her expression shift from shock to something harder, angrier. Rebecca documented every transfer, every shell company, every lie he told on his financial disclosures. This isn't just grounds for an unequal distribution of assets in your favor. This is potential fraud. "Fraud," Vivian repeated, her voice hollow. "He committed fraud. Against me. Against our daughter's future." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment, just staring at the screen. Then she stood abruptly and walked back to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. 3 years. We were still sleeping in the same bed 3 years ago. Maya was only 3. We took her to Disneyland that summer. I have photos of the 3 of us, Grant holding her on his shoulders, both of them laughing. And he was already planning to leave? Already stealing from us? Noah closed the laptop and stood. "Vivian, I knew he was unfaithful. I knew he was selfish. I knew our marriage was broken." Her voice cracked. "But some part of me still believed that he'd loved us once, that maybe we'd had something real before it fell apart. That's the story I've been telling myself to make it bearable, that we tried, that we had good years before the bad ones. But this?" She pressed her hand against the window glass. "This says he never loved me at all. You don't do this to someone you love. You don't plan their destruction while kissing them goodnight." Noah moved closer but didn't touch her, giving her space to feel whatever she needed to feel. "You're right. He didn't love you the way you deserved. But that's his failure, Vivian, not yours. You loved honestly. You tried to build something real. The fact that he was incapable of doing the same doesn't diminish what you brought to the marriage." "Doesn't it? I must have been so blind, so stupid. Everyone probably saw it except me. You weren't blind, you were loyal. There's a difference." Noah kept his voice gentle but firm. "And now you're done being loyal to someone who didn't earn it. Now we use this evidence to make sure you get everything you're entitled to and that Maya's future is protected." Vivian turned from the window and Noah saw tears tracking down her face. She didn't bother wiping them away. "What happens next?" "We file a motion for sanctions and an unequal distribution of assets based on Grant's fraudulent concealment. We demand full reimbursement to the marital estate for everything he hid, plus attorney's fees for the cost of uncovering his fraud. And we make it clear to his attorney that if Grant wants to avoid potential criminal charges, he'll settle this divorce on our terms." "Criminal charges?" "Depending on how the transfers were structured, there could be tax fraud involved. At minimum, he's in violation of his fiduciary duty to the marital estate. Rebecca's report is thorough enough to hand to a prosecutor if we needed to, though I suspect the threat alone will be enough to bring Grant to the negotiating table." Vivian wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't want his money, Noah. I mean, I do. It's mine and Maya's. We earned it. But that's not what this is about anymore. I want him to face consequences. I want the court to see exactly who he is. I want Maya to grow up knowing that her mother didn't just roll over and accept being treated like garbage. Then that's what we'll do. Noah pulled out a chair for her. Come sit back down. We need to talk strategy. They spent the next 2 hours going through every detail of Rebecca's report, building their approach for the motion, discussing how this would impact the custody evaluation and settlement negotiations. Vivian asked sharp questions, her mind working through the implications even as her hand shook every time they referenced a specific betrayal. At one point, her assistant knocked softly and brought in lunch, salads from somewhere expensive that Vivian barely touched. Noah ate methodically, the way he'd learned to do in law school when meals were just fuel between study sessions, while Vivian pushed lettuce around her plate and stared at the financial documents spread across the table. Can I ask you something? She said suddenly. Of course. Why haven't you asked me if I'm okay? Every other person in my life keeps asking, and I keep lying and saying I'm fine. But you haven't asked once. Noah set down his fork. Because I can see that you're not okay, and asking would just be making you perform an answer for my benefit. When you're ready to talk about how you're actually doing, you will. Until then, I'd rather focus on what I can actually help with. Vivian's laugh was wet and surprised. That's very perceptive. I pay attention. To all your clients. The question hung in the air between them, carrying weight neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Noah met her eyes and knew he should deflect, should keep this professional, should not admit that yes, he paid attention to her in ways that went beyond his usual careful observation of client well-being. But he was tired of lying, even to himself. No, he said quietly. Not like this. Vivian's breath caught. For a moment, neither of them moved, the conference room suddenly feeling much smaller than it had minutes ago. Rain drummed against the windows. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang distantly. Then Vivian looked away first, breaking the moment. We should get back to work. Yeah. Noah pulled the next document toward him, grateful for the excuse to focus on something concrete. Let's talk about the custody evaluation. Doctor, Chen will want to schedule her home visit with you and Maya soon. They worked for another hour, professional and focused, both of them carefully not mentioning what had just passed between them. By the time Noah left her office, the rain had softened to mist, and his head was full of legal strategy and the memory of Vivian's eyes when she'd asked if he paid attention to all his clients like this. The custody hearing was set for January 15th, which gave them 8 weeks to prepare. 8 weeks felt simultaneously like forever and nowhere near enough time. Dr. Sarah Chen conducted her evaluation with the kind of thoroughness that made Noah grateful they'd drawn her for this case. She interviewed Vivian twice, Grant once, and spent a combined 6 hours observing each parent with Maya in their respective homes. She spoke to Maya's teacher, her pediatrician, and the director of her after-school program. She reviewed school records, medical records, and the carefully documented timeline Noah had prepared showing Grant's absences, and Vivian's consistent presence throughout Maya's life. Vivian called Noah the night after Dr. Chen's home visit, her voice tight with anxiety. I don't know if it went well. Maya was tired, I was nervous, and at one point she asked Dr. Chen why grown-ups asked so many questions. Was that bad? Did I fail? That sounds like a 6-year-old being honest, which is exactly what Dr. Chen wants to see. Did Maya seem comfortable with you? I think so. She wanted me to make her hot chocolate, and she sat in my lap while we read books. She showed Dr. Chen her room and told her about the mural I painted on her wall when she was a baby. Then you did fine, Vivian. Dr. Chen isn't looking for performance. She's looking for authentic connection, and it sounds like that's exactly what she saw. There was a long pause on the line. Then, quietly, thank you for talking me down from the ledge. Again. Anytime. Noah, can I tell you something? Of course. This whole process, the divorce, the evaluation, all of it, it's been horrible. But working with you has been the one part that doesn't feel like drowning. You make me feel like maybe I can actually survive this. Like I'm not crazy for fighting back. Noah closed his eyes, sitting alone in his kitchen after Charlie had gone to bed, and felt the careful distance he'd been maintaining start to crumble. You're not crazy, and you're going to do more than survive, Vivian. You're going to win. I hope you're right. I'm always right. Ask my paralegal. She laughed, and Noah realized how much he'd come to love that sound. The moments when Vivian let herself be lighter than the weight she carried. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important, and by the time they hung up, Noah knew he was in deeper than he'd admitted even to himself. He was falling for his client. Had probably been falling since that first meeting, if he was honest. Maybe even since chemistry class 20 years ago, when he'd been too invisible to matter, and she'd been too remarkable to approach. But she was still his client, still vulnerable, still trusting him to guide her through this divorce with objectivity and professional judgment. Getting involved now would be unethical at worst, catastrophically bad timing at best. So Noah did what he always did when emotions threatened to derail his focus. He worked, late into the night, building their case, strengthening every argument, anticipating every move Grant's attorney might make, channeling everything he felt into making sure Vivian got the outcome she deserved. December arrived cold and sharp, bringing early snow that turned Portland into a postcard version of itself. Grant violated the restraining order twice, once by calling Vivian's cell phone directly, once by approaching her in the parking lot of Maya's school. Both violations were documented and reported to the court, earning Grant a stern warning from Judge Henley and strengthening Vivian's position. The settlement negotiations began in mid-December, conducted in a conference room at Rothman's firm with enough mahogany and leather to outfit a private club. Grant sat at the far end of the table, his expression carved from stone, while Marcus Rothman presented their counteroffer to Noah's initial demands. My client is willing to agree to joint custody with a 60-40 split in Ms. Sterling's favor, Rothman began, his tone suggesting this was an act of great generosity. He'll pay child support as calculated by state guidelines, and he proposes an equal division of all documented marital assets. Noah didn't bother hiding his contempt. Your client hid $1.8 million in marital assets and committed fraud by concealing them from mandatory disclosure. An equal division isn't just unacceptable, it's insulting. We're demanding full reimbursement to the marital estate for every dollar he hid, a 70-30 unequal distribution in Ms. Sterling's favor as sanctions for his fraud, full attorney's fees for the cost of uncovering his deception, and primary custody with Grant receiving standard visitation. Grant leaned forward, his voice cold. You're dreaming if you think any judge is going to give you 70%. Then let's go to trial and find out, Noah said calmly. I'd be happy to present Rebecca Chen's forensic analysis to Judge Henley in open court, along with testimony about your systematic fraud over a 3-year period. We can also discuss the 2 restraining order violations, your history of harassment, and the testimony Dr. Chen gathered about your minimal involvement in Maya's daily care. I'm confident in how that will play out. Rothman held up a hand. Let's not escalate unnecessarily. Perhaps we can find middle ground. There is no middle ground when your client committed fraud, Marcus. He stole from his own daughter's future while planning to destroy her mother in divorce court. That's not a negotiation. That's a moral failing, and Vivian shouldn't have to compromise on getting back what was taken from her. The negotiations went nowhere. Grant refused to admit wrongdoing. Rothman kept positioning every concession as generosity rather than acknowledgement of fraud, and Noah held firm on every demand. After 3 hours, they adjourned with nothing resolved and the understanding that they'd be going to trial. Outside in the parking lot, Vivian sagged against her car. That was brutal. That was Grant realizing he doesn't have the leverage he thought he had. Noah stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He expected you to fold the moment things got difficult. Instead, you've matched him at every turn, and now he's scared. He didn't look scared. He looked furious. Same thing for men like him. Fury is just fear in expensive clothing. Vivian turned to look at Noah, and in the amber glow of the parking lot lights, with snow beginning to fall around them, she looked achingly vulnerable. What happens now? Now we prepare for trial. Dr. Chen's report should be filed with the court next week. Once we have that, we'll know exactly what we're working with for custody. And I'll file our motion for sanctions based on the financial fraud. We go into court with everything documented, everything proven, and we let Judge Henley see exactly who Grant Sterling is when the mask comes off. I'm terrified. I know, but you're also stronger than you think, and you're not facing this alone. Vivian's eyes glistened. Noah, I don't know what I would have done without you. I mean that. You've been more than an attorney. You've been... She stopped, seeming to realize where that sentence was heading and pulling back from the edge of it. Noah felt the words hanging between them anyway, heavy with everything they weren't saying. You would have been fine, he said, even though he knew it wasn't true, even though he'd become more invested in her case than any attorney should be. You're a fighter, Vivian. You've always been a fighter. You just needed someone to remind you. How did you know that? About me being a fighter? This was dangerous territory again, but Noah was tired of deflecting. Because I've been watching you for 20 years, even when you didn't know I existed. Vivian froze. What? Noah knew he should stop, should walk it back, should maintain the professional distance that had already eroded to almost nothing. But standing in a snowy parking lot with this woman who'd been remarkable at 17 and was somehow even more remarkable now, exhausted and fighting and refusing to break, he couldn't keep pretending. We went to high school together, he said quietly. Lincoln High. You were Vivian Monroe then. I sat 3 rows behind you in AP Chemistry junior year. You probably never noticed me. I was the kid in the back who never talked, who ate lunch in the library, who was too busy surviving to actually participate in high school. But I noticed you. Vivian's hand went to her mouth. Oh my God, that's why you seemed familiar. I've been trying to place it since our first meeting, and I thought I was imagining things. You weren't imagining it. Why didn't you tell me? Because you hired me to be your attorney, not to take a trip down memory lane, and because it didn't seem relevant to what you needed. Not relevant? Vivian's voice climbed slightly. Noah, that's significant. We have history, shared past. We don't, though. Not really. Noah kept his tone gentle but honest. You had high school. I had survival. We existed in the same building, but we lived in completely different worlds. I was nobody to you then, and that was fine. That was how it should have been. But now, 20 years later, you walked into my office needing help, and I could finally be someone useful to you. That felt like enough. Vivian was crying now, tears streaming down her face in the falling snow. You're not nobody, Noah. You've never been nobody. And the fact that you think that about yourself breaks my heart. Vivian, no, listen to me. She moved closer, and Noah could smell her perfume, could see the snowflakes catching in her hair. You've spent weeks fighting for me, believing in me, making me feel like I matter. You've protected my daughter, exposed my husband's lies, and never once made me feel weak for needing help. You've been kind and patient and brilliant, and somewhere along the way, I started to... She stopped again, but this time Noah knew what she'd been about to say because he felt it too, had been feeling it for weeks, maybe longer. We can't, he said, his voice rough. Not now. Not while you're my client. It wouldn't be ethical, and you're too vulnerable right now to know what you actually want versus what you need. Don't tell me what I need. Vivian's voice was fierce through the tears. I've had people telling me what I need for years. Grant telling me I needed to be less focused on work, more focused on him. Therapists telling me I needed to communicate better. Friends telling me I needed to try harder to make my marriage work. I'm done with other people defining my needs, Noah. I know what I feel. And what do you feel? Safe. For the first time in years, I feel safe when I'm with you, like I can breathe all the way, like someone actually sees me and isn't trying to change what they see. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. And I feel something else too. Something I'm probably not supposed to feel for my attorney, but I can't help it. You make me want to believe that maybe there's life after all this pain, that maybe I could be happy again someday, that maybe... Noah stepped back, putting physical distance between them before he did something they'd both regret. Vivian, stop, please. I care about you too much to take advantage of you when you're in the middle of a divorce and custody battle. You're not thinking clearly right now. You're grateful and scared and looking for someone to hold on to, and I'm here, so it makes sense that your emotions would latch on to me. But once this is over, once you have your life back and you're steady again, you might feel completely different, and I won't risk losing your trust by crossing a line we can't uncross. Vivian stared at him, snow collecting on her shoulders, her breath visible in the cold air. You really believe that? That I'm just confused? I believe you're going through the hardest thing you've ever faced, And I believe you deserve better than an attorney who takes advantage of that vulnerability. So yes, Vivian, we can't. Not now." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the whisper of falling snow and distant traffic. Finally, Vivian nodded once, sharp and painful. "Okay, if that's what you need it to be, then okay." She turned toward her car door. "I should go. Maya's at my sister's and I need to pick her up." "Vivian, wait. No, you're right. This was inappropriate. I'm sorry for putting you in an awkward position. I'll see you next week for trial prep." She got in her car before Noah could respond, and he stood in the parking lot watching her taillights disappear into the snowy night, wondering if he'd just made the most ethical decision of his career or the biggest mistake of his life. His phone rang. Charlie's school, calling about tomorrow's early dismissal for the winter concert. Noah answered it, forced himself to focus on logistics and schedules and the ordinary demands of being a parent, and tried not to think about how Vivian had looked at him like he might be worth something more than the invisible boy he'd always believed himself to be. Dr. Chen's report arrived the following Tuesday. Noah read it 3 times, his chest tight with something that felt like vindication mixed with sadness. The conclusion was clear. Maya Sterling thrived in her mother's care and showed age-appropriate attachment and comfort. She described her mother as her primary caretaker, the parent she turned to when scared or hurt, the one who knew her routines and preferences. When asked about her father, Maya's responses were positive but vague. He was fun when he visited, but she couldn't describe their usual activities together or remember recent times they'd spent alone. Dr. Chen's recommendation was unambiguous. Primary custody to Vivian with standard visitation for Grant, with a gradual expansion of parenting time as Grant developed more consistent involvement in Maya's daily life. It was everything they'd needed, everything they'd fought for. Noah forwarded the report to Vivian with a simple message. "We won the custody evaluation. Call me when you can." She called within minutes, her voice breaking. "She recommended me?" "She recommended what's best for Maya, which is you. Primary custody, Vivian. You're going to get your daughter." The sound Vivian made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "I can't believe it. I was so sure. I thought Grant would find a way to win. He always finds a way." "Not this time. The evidence is too clear, the documentation too thorough. Grant can push for trial if he wants, but Marcus Rothman is smart enough to know they'll lose. I expect a settlement offer within the week." "What kind of offer?" "The kind where Grant finally admits he doesn't have the leverage he thought he had. Trust me, Vivian, this is where we start winning." Noah was right. The settlement offer arrived 4 days later, just as Portland was bracing for another snowstorm. Grant agreed to primary custody with Vivian, standard visitation schedule, full reimbursement to the marital estate for hidden assets, a 65 to 35 unequal distribution in Vivian's favor, and payment of her attorney's fees. It was almost everything they'd demanded, almost complete victory. And when Vivian came to Noah's office to review the settlement agreement, when she sat across from him looking lighter than he'd seen her in months, he knew that the hardest part was over. The case was ending, which meant the reason they couldn't be anything more than attorney and client was about to disappear. And Noah had no idea what came next. The final hearing took place on January 15th, exactly as Judge Henley had scheduled 3 months earlier. The morning arrived cold and crystalline, the kind of winter day where the sky stretched impossibly blue and the air felt sharp enough to cut. Noah stood outside the courthouse at 7:30, earlier than he needed to be, watching his breath cloud in the freezing air and thinking about endings. The settlement agreement was solid. Marcus Rothman had negotiated a few minor points, adjusted the visitation schedule slightly, reduced the attorney's fees by 10%, but the core remained intact. Vivian got primary custody, got her money back, got her life back. Grant got standard visitation and the knowledge that his attempt to destroy his wife had failed spectacularly. Today was just formality. They'd appear before Judge Henley, she'd approve the settlement, and the divorce would be finalized, clean, professional. Exactly how these things were supposed to end when both parties finally accepted reality. So why did Noah feel like he was standing on the edge of something that had nothing to do with legal proceedings? His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "Running late. Maya wouldn't let go of me this morning. She knows something's happening today, even though I tried to keep it normal. Be there in 15. Noah texted back, "No rush. We have time." He thought about Maya. 6 years old and caught in the undertow of her parents' dissolution, too young to understand why Daddy didn't live at home anymore, but old enough to feel the tension, the changes, the way her world had shifted beneath her feet. Noah had never met her, had only seen photos Vivian kept on her phone, but he'd fought for her anyway, fought to make sure she'd grow up with stability, with honesty, with a mother who'd chosen courage over comfort. Charlie had texted him that morning too, a string of emojis that roughly translated to good luck, and also, "Can we have pizza tonight?" 8 years old and still believing his dad could fix anything, still trusting that the world made sense because Noah worked so hard to make it seem that way. What would Charlie think of Vivian? The question had been living in Noah's mind for weeks now, ever since that night in the snowy parking lot when Vivian had almost said she was falling for him, and Noah had pulled back because ethics and timing and all the rational reasons that felt increasingly hollow the more he examined them. The case was ending today. Vivian wouldn't be his client anymore. The ethical barrier would disappear, and Noah would have to figure out what he actually wanted instead of hiding behind professional obligation. The problem was, he already knew what he wanted. He wanted Vivian. Had wanted her since chemistry class, maybe? Or since that first meeting in his office when she'd walked in looking composed and terrified and like someone who needed exactly the kind of help Noah had spent his life learning how to provide. He wanted more conversations that stretched past midnight, more moments where she looked at him like he was someone remarkable instead of someone invisible. More of the feeling he got when she smiled at something he'd said. Like maybe he'd been preparing his whole life to be exactly the person she needed at exactly this moment. But wanting wasn't the same as knowing if it was right or fair or even possible. Vivian was emerging from 9 years of manipulation and betrayal. She had a daughter to focus on, a company to run, and a whole new life to build from the ruins of her marriage. The last thing she needed was her attorney developing feelings and complicating her fresh start. Except she'd said she felt safe with him. She'd stood in the snow and cried and told him she felt something more, something that scared her and pulled at her and made her want to believe in happiness again. Noah was still turning this over in his mind when Vivian appeared at the base of the courthouse steps, her breath visible in the cold air, her cheeks flushed from rushing. She wore a navy dress and heels, her hair pulled back simply, and when she saw Noah, something in her expression softened with what looked like relief. "Sorry I'm late," she said, climbing the steps toward him. Maya had a moment. "Is she okay?" "She will be. My sister's with her. They're making cookies and pretending today is just a normal Tuesday." Vivian stopped beside Noah, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something subtle and familiar now, after months of meetings. "Are you ready for this?" "The hearing? That's the easy part. Rothman will present the settlement, Judge Henley will ask a few questions, and you'll both confirm you understand the terms. 15 minutes, tops." "I meant after. Are you ready for this to be over?" Noah met her eyes and saw his own uncertainty reflected there. "Are you?" "I don't know. I should be, right? This is what I've been fighting for. Freedom, custody, justice. But actually getting to the finish line feels strange. Like I've been running so hard for so long that I forgot what it's like to stand still." "You don't have to stand still. You can keep moving, just in a different direction now, toward whatever comes next." "And what comes next, Noah?" The question carried weight that had nothing to do with legal proceedings. They stood on the courthouse steps in the freezing morning, people streaming past them toward other hearings and other endings, and Noah knew this was the moment, the one where he either stepped forward or stayed invisible forever. But before he could answer, Marcus Rothman appeared at the top of the steps, Grant trailing behind him looking expensive and empty. Grant's eyes found Vivian and something cold flickered across his face before he masked it with indifference. "Ms. Sterling, Mr. Bennett." Rothman nodded curtly. "Shall we get this over with?" The hearing was exactly as Noah had predicted, efficient, formal, and brief. Judge Henley reviewed the settlement agreement, asked both parties if they understood the terms, and entered into them willingly, and signed the final decree with a stroke of her pen that officially ended 9 years of marriage. "You're divorced," she said, looking between Vivian and Grant. "The custody arrangement is now legally binding, as are the financial terms. Mr. Sterling, you have 30 days to complete the asset transfers outlined in the settlement. Ms. Sterling, you have primary custody effective immediately, with the visitation schedule beginning this weekend. I expect both of you to follow these terms precisely and to communicate respectfully for the sake of your daughter. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. Then we're done here. Good luck to both of you. The gavel came down, and it was finished. Grant left the courtroom without looking at Vivian, Rothman hurrying after him with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen too many bitter divorces. Vivian stayed seated for a long moment, staring at her hands, and Noah gave her the space to process. Finally, she stood. That's it? It's really over? It's really over. You're free, Vivian. They walked out of the courtroom together, through the hallway where other people's legal dramas were unfolding, down the steps into the January sunlight that felt warmer than it should for the middle of winter. Vivian stopped on the sidewalk, tilted her face up to the sun, and closed her eyes. I keep waiting to feel different, she said. Like there should be this moment of transformation where suddenly everything is clear and I know exactly who I am without being Grant Sterling's wife. But I just feel tired and relieved and scared about what happens now. That's normal. You've been in survival mode for months. It takes time to remember how to do anything else. Vivian opened her eyes and looked at Noah. What about you? Do you feel different now that the case is over? I feel like I did my job, and like I'm going to miss our meetings. Just the meetings? Noah's chest tightened. They were doing this now, apparently. Having the conversation they'd been avoiding since the parking lot, since that moment when Vivian had admitted she felt something and Noah had pulled back. No, he said quietly. Not just the meetings. Then what? I'm going to miss having a legitimate reason to check on you, to make sure you're eating lunch and not working yourself to death, to hear your voice when you call with questions that you probably already know the answers to, but ask anyway, because I think maybe you just needed someone to talk to. Vivian's smile was soft and sad. I'm going to miss having a legitimate reason to call you at midnight when I can't sleep because my mind won't stop spinning. To pretend I need legal advice when really I just need to hear someone remind me that I'm not crazy for fighting this hard. You were never crazy. You were brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified every single day. That's what brave is, Vivian, doing the terrifying thing anyway. They stood on the sidewalk outside the courthouse where Noah had fought for dozens of clients, where he'd won and lost cases and learned to measure success in degrees of harm reduction rather than happy endings. But this felt different. This felt like something ending that he wasn't ready to let go of, even though he knew it had to end, knew that the attorney-client relationship had run its course, and whatever came next would have to be built on different ground. I should let you get back to your office, Vivian said finally. I'm sure you have other clients waiting, other cases that need your attention. I do, but none of them are you. Noah, I know. I know this is complicated and you need time to process everything that's happened, and I'm probably the last person you should be thinking about right now. But I need you to know something before you walk away. Vivian went very still. What? 20 years ago, I sat 3 rows behind you in chemistry class and thought you were the most remarkable person I'd ever seen. Not because you were popular or pretty, though you were both, but because you were kind when you didn't have to be. Because you helped people when you thought no one was watching. Because you moved through the world like it made sense, like goodness was just the default setting. And for a kid like me who was surviving on free lunch and scholarship money and the knowledge that most people didn't see me at all, that kind of natural kindness was extraordinary. Vivian's eyes were wet. Noah, let me finish. I never spoke to you. Never even tried, because what would someone like you want with someone like me? But I watched you graduate valedictorian and go off to college and probably build an amazing life. And I was happy for you, even though I'd never know if you were actually happy. And then 20 years later, you walked into my office asking for help, and I got to be the person who fought for you, who protected you and your daughter and made sure Grant Sterling couldn't destroy you the way he planned. That felt like the universe giving me a second chance to matter in your life, even if you never knew about the first time. A tear slipped down Vivian's cheek. I noticed you. Noah's breath caught. What? In chemistry class. I noticed you. Vivian stepped closer, and Noah could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could see his own reflection there. You were the quiet boy who always had the right answer when Mr. Peterson called on you, who never raised his hand but clearly understood the material better than anyone else in class. I remember thinking you seemed sad, like you were carrying something heavy that the rest of us couldn't see. And I wanted to talk to you, but you seemed so separate, so closed off, that I didn't know how to approach you without it seeming weird or pitying. You remember that? I remember you, Noah. Maybe not your name until you told me, and maybe I didn't understand who you were back then, but I saw you. And when you told me we'd gone to high school together, when I finally placed where I knew you from, I realized that the boy who seemed sad and brilliant and separate had grown into a man who uses that brilliance to protect people, who channels whatever pain he carried into making sure other people don't have to carry it alone. That's remarkable, too. Noah didn't know what to say. For 20 years, he'd believed himself invisible, forgotten, a background character in other people's stories. And now Vivian was telling him she'd seen him all along, that even then she'd noticed something, that maybe they'd been circling each other across 2 decades, waiting for the right moment to finally collide. "I'm not your attorney anymore," he said. "As of 10 minutes ago, you're not my client." "I know, which means I can tell you that I've been falling for you since you walked into my office. Maybe before that, if I'm honest. Maybe I've been falling for you since I was 17 years old and didn't have the courage or the standing to do anything about it. And now? Now you're free. Now I'm free to tell you that when I think about my life, about Charlie's life, about what I want the future to look like, you're in it. If you want to be. If you're ready for that. If you think maybe there's a version of this story where the invisible boy and the remarkable girl actually get a chance to build something real together." Vivian was fully crying now, tears streaming down her face in the January sunlight. "I'm a mess, Noah. I'm divorced with a 6-year-old daughter and a company that takes up too much of my time and probably months of therapy ahead of me to undo the damage Grant did. I don't know how to be in a relationship that isn't toxic. I don't even know who I am outside of being someone's wife or someone's mother or someone's CEO. You deserve better than someone who's still figuring out how to put herself back together. I don't want better. I want you. Messy, complicated, figuring it out you. And I want to help you put yourself back together, the same way you helped me remember that maybe I'm not as invisible as I've always believed. We can figure out the rest as we go. What about Charlie? I don't want to be the woman who comes into his life and disrupts what you've built. Charlie deserves to see his dad happy, and he deserves to meet someone who understands what it means to put your kid first, to build your whole life around making sure they're safe and loved and stable. You already know how to do that, Vivian. You've been doing it for Maya her entire life." Vivian wiped her eyes, mascara smudging slightly. "This is crazy. We barely know each other outside of lawyer meetings and case strategy. Then let's get to know each other. Coffee, dinner, normal conversations about things that aren't custody evaluations or financial fraud. We can go slow, take our time, make sure this is real, and not just trauma bonding or gratitude or whatever rational explanation you're probably coming up with right now. What if it doesn't work? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Vivian, I've spent my whole life being careful, being safe, not taking risks because I couldn't afford to fail. And where has that gotten me? A good life, sure. A son I love and a career I'm proud of. But it's also gotten me 20 years of wondering what if, 20 years of watching from the sidelines. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to be invisible in my own life." Vivian looked at him for a long moment, and Noah could see her processing, weighing, trying to decide if she was brave enough to take this leap after everything she'd just survived. Then she smiled, watery and genuine and beautiful. "Coffee," she said. "Let's start with coffee." "Yeah?" "Yeah. But Noah, I need you to know that this terrifies me. The idea of trying again, of opening myself up to someone after Grant, it makes me want to run. So if we do this, I need you to be patient with me. I need you to understand that some days I'm going to be a mess, and some days I'm going to pull away because old habits die hard, and I'm still learning how to trust. I can be patient. I've been patient for 20 years. What's a little more time?" Vivian laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. "You're ridiculous. You're remarkable. I'm just keeping up." They stood there smiling at each other like teenagers, and Noah felt something in his chest loosen. Some old weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. Hope, maybe. or just the simple relief of finally saying the thing he'd been thinking for months, years, maybe his whole life. "I should go," Vivian said eventually. "I need to pick up Maya and tell her it's done, that we're going to be okay. Tell her the truth, that her mom fought for her and won. I'll tell her that her mom had help from someone pretty amazing." They exchanged numbers, personal ones this time, not the office line Noah had been using for professional communication. Made tentative plans for coffee on Saturday morning, somewhere quiet where they could talk without the weight of legal proceedings hanging over them. And then Vivian left, walking to her car with her shoulders straighter than Noah had seen them in months. Noah stood on the courthouse steps and watched her drive away, then pulled out his phone and called Denise. "The Sterling case?" "Finalized. Settlement approved. Client is no longer a client." "So you're finally going to ask her out?" Noah had learned not to be surprised by how much his paralegal noticed. "We're getting coffee on Saturday." "About damn time. I've been watching you moon over that woman for 3 months. It was getting painful." "I wasn't mooning." "You were absolutely mooning, but I'm happy for you, Noah. You deserve someone who sees how good you are." "Thanks, Denise. I'll see you tomorrow." Noah hung up and started walking toward his car, thinking about coffee dates and slow beginnings, and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, this could actually work. The next few weeks unfolded with a careful slowness that Noah appreciated more than he expected. Coffee on Saturday became dinner on Wednesday, became a walk through the Saturday market on a surprisingly warm February afternoon. They talked about everything except the divorce, learning each other in contexts that had nothing to do with legal strategy. Noah learned that Vivian loved old movies, the black and white kind that required patience and attention, that she'd wanted to be an architect before falling into design, and sometimes she still sketched buildings in the margins of her notebooks during meetings, that she was terrible at cooking but kept trying anyway because she wanted Maya to grow up with memories of home-cooked meals, even if they were often slightly burned. Vivian learned that Noah had taught himself to play guitar in college, but rarely touched it anymore because evenings were for Charlie. That he'd run a marathon once on a bet and sworn never again, but he still ran most mornings before the sun came up because it was the only time his mind was truly quiet. That he volunteered at a legal aid clinic 2 Saturdays a month, helping people who couldn't afford attorneys because his mother had needed help like that once and couldn't get it. They learned each other slowly, carefully, building trust like a structure that needed solid foundation before it could support any weight. Noah didn't meet Maya until March, 6 weeks after the divorce finalized. Vivian wanted to make sure this was real, that Noah wasn't going anywhere, before introducing another person into her daughter's life. Noah understood completely. He'd do the same with Charlie. When they finally did meet at a children's museum where Maya could explore while the adults talked, Noah watched this small girl with her mother's eyes and her own fierce curiosity and felt something settle in his chest. She showed him her favorite exhibit about weather patterns, explained in serious detail how tornadoes formed, and asked if he knew any good jokes. "Why don't scientists trust atoms?" Noah asked. Maya thought about it, her face scrunched in concentration. "Why?" "Because they make up everything." She groaned, exactly the way Charlie did when Noah told bad jokes. And Noah glanced at Vivian to find her watching them with an expression that looked like hope, mixed with fear, mixed with something softer that made his heart skip. Later, after they'd dropped Maya back at Vivian's house and were sitting in Noah's car in comfortable silence, Vivian said quietly, "She liked you." "I liked her too. She's brilliant and funny, and she has excellent taste in science exhibits. She asked me later if you were my boyfriend. I didn't know what to tell her." Noah turned to face Vivian. "What do you want to tell her?" "I want to tell her yes. But that terrifies me because what if this doesn't work? What if I'm still too broken from Grant? Or what if you realize I'm too much work? Or what if—" "Vivian." Noah took her hand, feeling her fingers cold and shaking slightly. "I'm not Grant. I'm not going to spend years systematically dismantling you and then walk away. I'm not going to use your love for Maya against you. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not until it's too late for you to leave. I'm just going to show up, every day, in the boring ways and the hard ways and the normal ways. That's what I do. That's who I am." I know that in my head, but my heart is still learning to trust again." "Then we'll give it time, as much time as you need. But Vivian, I'm not going anywhere. You can tell Maya I'm your boyfriend, or your friend, or the guy who helped mommy with some grown-up stuff. Whatever makes you comfortable. I'm just grateful to be part of your life in any capacity. Vivian kissed him then, soft and tentative and sweet, and Noah felt 20 years of wondering what if finally resolve into something real. Charlie met Vivian in April, over pizza at their favorite neighborhood place. Noah had been nervous, Charlie was protective of their small family unit, wary of changes that might disrupt the stability they'd built together. But Vivian won him over with genuine interest in his soccer stories and his favorite video games, asking questions that showed she was actually listening instead of just performing interest. "She's nice," Charlie announced later that night, sprawled on Noah's bed while Noah folded laundry. "And she laughed at my joke about the chicken crossing the playground. She has good taste in jokes." "Are you going to marry her?" Noah fumbled the shirt he was folding. "What? We've only been dating a few months, buddy." "I know, but you look at her the same way Coach Mike looks at his wife, like she's the best thing you've ever seen." Noah sat down on the edge of the bed. "Would it be okay with you if things got more serious with Vivian?" Charlie was quiet for a moment, thinking in that serious way he had that reminded Noah so much of himself at that age. "Is she nice to you?" "Very nice." "Does she make you happy?" "Yeah, she does." "Then it's okay with me." "But Dad, her daughter is 6. That's basically a baby. Are we going to have to be careful around her?" Noah laughed. "Maya's pretty tough, actually. But yeah, if things get serious, we'd all need to figure out how to be a family together. That's a big change. I've always wanted a sister, or a brother, but I guess a younger sister could be cool too. Don't get ahead of yourself. We're just dating." "For now," Charlie said with the confidence of an 8-year-old who thought he understood romance. "But you're going to marry her eventually, I can tell." Noah didn't argue, just finished folding laundry and thought about the strange way life worked. How you could spend years believing you knew exactly what your story was, only to have someone walk into your office asking for help, and suddenly everything you thought you knew about yourself rearranged into something new. Summer came, bringing long days and the kind of heat that made Portland feel almost tropical. Noah and Vivian fell into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Dinners at each other's houses, weekends at the coast with both kids, quiet mornings when they'd meet for coffee before work, and just talk. Grant remained a presence at the edges, exercising his visitation rights with Maya, but never quite becoming the father he'd promised to be. He'd show up late sometimes, cut visits short for work emergencies that Maya had learned not to question. Vivian handled it with more grace than Noah expected, never bad-mouthing Grant to their daughter, but also not making excuses for his absences anymore. "She's learning who he really is," Vivian told Noah one evening in August. Sitting on his back porch, while Charlie and Maya played in the yard, their laughter floating on the warm air. "I can't protect her from that. I can just make sure she knows she's loved regardless. You're a good mother." "I'm trying. Some days better than others." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and Noah wrapped his arm around her, feeling the solid weight of her against him. "Noah, can I ask you something?" "Always." "What do you want, long term, I mean? Because I need to know if we're building towards something, or if this is just, I don't know, nice while it lasts." Noah had been thinking about this question for months, turning it over in his mind during early morning runs and late nights when he couldn't sleep. "I want what we're already building, a life where we both show up for our kids and for each other, where we're honest even when it's hard, where we choose each other every day instead of just coasting on old promises. I want Sunday mornings with all 4 of us, and I want to help Maya with homework while you help Charlie with his science projects. I want to build something real, Vivian, something that looks nothing like what you had with Grant or what I had with Charlie's mother, something that's actually ours." "That sounds like marriage." "Eventually, maybe, if that's what you want. But I'm not in a rush. We can take our time, make sure we're both ready, make sure the kids are ready. There's no deadline on this." Vivian was quiet for a long moment, and Noah wondered if he'd pushed too hard, assumed too much. Then she said softly, "I want that too, the life you described. I want it so much it scares me." "Then we'll be scared together, and we'll build it anyway." They sat on the porch, watching the sunset and their children play, and Noah thought about how far they'd both come from that first meeting in his office. How much had changed and how much had stayed exactly the same. Vivian still twisted her hands when she was nervous, still worked too hard, still carried the weight of wanting to be perfect, even though Noah kept reminding her that she didn't have to be. And Noah still watched from the sidelines sometimes, still felt like the invisible boy, even though Vivian saw him so clearly now that he couldn't hide anymore. But they were learning how to be loved, how to trust, how to build something together instead of separately, learning how to stop surviving and start living. The proposal came in December, a year and a half after the divorce finalized, on a cold Saturday morning when Noah and Vivian had dropped both kids at a birthday party and found themselves with 2 unexpected hours of freedom. They went to a coffee shop near the waterfront, the same one where they'd had their first non-professional meeting, and sat by the window watching the city wake up around them. Noah had been carrying the ring in his jacket pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. But sitting across from Vivian in the morning light, watching her wrap her hands around her coffee cup and smile at something on her phone, probably a text from Maya about the party, he realized there was no perfect moment. There was just this. Just them. Just the ordinary magic of having found each other across 20 years and countless obstacles. "Vivian," he said, and something in his tone made her look up. "Yeah. I've been invisible most of my life, learned how to survive by being small, by not taking up space, by watching from the sidelines instead of participating. And then you walked into my office asking for help, and suddenly I couldn't be invisible anymore. Because you needed someone to fight for you, and I couldn't do that from the shadows. I had to step forward, had to let you see me." "Noah, where's this going?" He pulled the ring from his pocket, a simple band with a single diamond that had taken him 3 weeks to choose. "It's going toward me asking if you'll marry me, if you'll build this life we've been talking about, if you'll let me keep fighting for you and Maya, not because you need protecting anymore, but just because that's what people do when they love each other. They show up, they fight for each other, they choose each other every day." Vivian's hands went to her mouth, tears already spilling over. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. I love you, Vivian. I love how hard you fight for Maya, how you rebuilt your whole life from scratch and didn't let Grant's betrayal destroy you. I love how you make terrible dinners and act like they're fine, how you sketch buildings in the margins of your notebooks, how you've learned to trust me even though trust is the hardest thing Grant took from you. I love who you are and who you're becoming, and I want to be there for all of it. So yes, I'm serious. Will you marry me?" Vivian was crying fully now, and Noah couldn't tell if that was good or bad until she said, "Yes. Yes, of course, yes. I love you too, Noah. I love how you see people, how you believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, how you're patient with my damage even when it's hard. I love how you are with Charlie, how you've made space in your life for Maya without making it seem like an obligation. I love that you understand what it means to build something from broken pieces. Yes, I'll marry you." Noah slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, and then they were both laughing and crying in the middle of the coffee shop while other patrons pretended not to notice but smiled anyway because joy was contagious like that. They told the kids that evening, sitting in Vivian's living room with Maya and Charlie on the couch between them. Charlie whooped and high-fived Maya, who looked confused but happy because everyone else seemed happy. And Noah looked at this small family they'd assembled from 2 broken ones and felt something that had been missing his entire life finally click into place. Belonging. The wedding was in May, small and simple in the backyard of the house Noah and Vivian had bought together. A craftsman in southeast Portland with enough bedrooms for everyone, and a yard big enough for both kids to play in. Charlie stood as Noah's best man, serious in his miniature suit, and Maya was Vivian's flower girl, taking her job with the kind of focused intensity that made everyone smile. Judge Henley officiated, which felt appropriate given how their story had unfolded. "I've seen a lot of divorces in my career," she said during the ceremony, "but I've never seen one lead to this. You two took something painful and transformed it into something beautiful. That's not easy, and it's not common. Hold on to that. Remember that you chose each other not in spite of your scars, but because of them." Noah slipped a ring on Vivian's finger and promised to keep showing up, to keep fighting for her, to be visible in all the ways that mattered. Vivian promised the same, her voice steady and sure. No twisted hands or hidden fear, just certainty. They kissed while their children cheered, and Noah thought about the invisible boy in the back row of chemistry class who'd watched Vivian Monroe from a distance and thought she lived in a different world, about how wrong he'd been, how everyone carried their own invisible pain, how remarkable people weren't immune to hurt, but also how sometimes, if you were patient enough and brave enough and willing to step out of the shadows, those parallel worlds could finally touch, could merge, could become something neither person expected but both desperately needed. Life after the wedding settled into a new normal that was chaotic and beautiful and nothing like the careful, controlled existence Noah had built as a single father. Maya learned to call him Dad, though she still called Grant by his first name on the weekends she saw him. Charlie discovered he loved having a younger sister to teach things to, even if she sometimes drove him crazy with questions. Vivian and Noah figured out how to balance two demanding careers with parenting and marriage, learning as they went, making mistakes and fixing them together. Grant remained at the edges, fulfilling his visitation requirements, but never quite becoming the father Maya deserved. But she had Noah now, steady and present and showing her through daily action what it meant to be loved without conditions. On their first anniversary, Noah found Vivian in their bedroom looking at an old yearbook, Lincoln High, class of 2006. She had it open to the junior class photo, her finger on a blurry picture of a serious boy in the back row who Noah barely recognized as himself. "I found this when I was unpacking some old boxes," she said. "I wanted to see if I could find you, if I'd actually noticed you back then, or if I'd invented that memory to make our story more romantic. And you're there. In the background of so many photos I didn't remember until I saw them again. The library in the background of student council pictures. The edge of the football field during graduation. Always there, always watching, and I never really saw you until 20 years later when I needed you most." Noah sat beside her on the bed. Maybe that's how it was supposed to work. Maybe I needed those 20 years to become someone worth seeing, someone who could actually help you instead of just admiring you from a distance. "You were always worth seeing, Noah. I just wasn't looking in the right places." She closed the yearbook and turned to face him. "But I'm looking now, and I see you completely. The boy you were, the man you became, the father and husband you are. All of it. And I love all of it." Noah kissed her, soft and sweet, and full of gratitude for second chances and parallel lives that finally found their intersection. Outside their window, evening was falling on Portland, the city lights beginning to glow in the dusk. Somewhere in the house, Charlie and Maya were arguing over whose turn it was to pick the movie for family night, their voices carrying that particular quality of sibling bickering that was more affection than actual conflict. This was Noah's life now, not quiet or simple or carefully controlled, but full, abundant, rich with the kind of messy love that came from showing up every day and choosing each other over and over again. He'd spent years being invisible, watching from the sidelines, surviving by staying small. But Vivian had seen him anyway, had needed him, had loved him despite all the ways he still sometimes felt like that scared kid in the back row. And together, they'd built something remarkable from their separate survival stories, a home where both of them could finally stop running, a family assembled from broken pieces that had learned to fit together perfectly, a love that was chosen daily, fought for constantly, and treasured completely. The invisible boy and the remarkable girl, finally in the same world, finally visible to each other, finally home.